Hello everyone, and welcome to the 21st episode of the Look Out Serve 40k podcast, a Warhammer 40,000 podcast made, produced and developed by free friends and assortment of other people who are also our friends. Again, I need to find out the rhythm, or find the rhythm, for expressing what we are as a collective group. But nonetheless, predominantly there are three of us. Me, Dan, hello, lovely to see you again, and my good buddy Phil. How you doing, Phil?
Oh, I'm good, thanks. How's it going?
Mate, it's going alright actually, yeah. It's been an eventful and or exciting couple of weeks. We went up to WarhammerFest, as you know, because you were there, right?
Oh, it was indeed.
There you go. So that was a good time. We saw a lot of stuff there, which we will be talking about later in the show. And outside of that, yeah, just been working on a few different projects, having lots of work done around the house. Had my windows redone, got my bathroom getting done, working on the gaming room as well at the moment. So I've been getting all that done, which is cool. I've bought myself, some curtain-y type things to drape around, and I'm buying a bunch of webcams, and I think, maybe, just maybe in the future, we might be able to produce some higher quality battle reports for the various people to maybe enjoy down the road. Making no promises, though. But, that's predominantly what I've been up to. How about you, man? What have you been doing?
So I've been doing a fair bit of sort of scratch build modelling. So, as I'm sure I've mentioned before, I've been working on a Conqueror cannon-esque turret, which is compatible with the Mars Alpha Lehman Russ turrets. So I've been doing that and casting them up. And then eventually I'll stick them on my beyondthetabletop.com website. And then I've also been working on a cover plate for my internal sponsons kit. So the idea is, once you've got the sponsons on and you want to WYSIWYG it where you don't have the sponsons, there'd be like a little vent covering that you can add on, so they visually look correct if you don't want the tank to have the sponsons on for whatever reason. So I've been doing those two bits in terms of modelling, and then I've also set myself up with a Patreon account, which will hopefully fund some of my sort of hobby videos I do, like the tutorial videos that I do on YouTube, because they take ages to put together. So I've been doing that recently as well.
There you are. You've entered the wondrous world of Patreon. Begging for money on the internet.
I know, unfortunately so. I'm not really begging, but it's more of a, if you would like to give me money, that will be awesome, and I'll give you a few extra freebies. But the majority of the content that I do on, for example, Instagram, Facebook and YouTube is forever free. I don't I do want to do a kind of content locked, like gated model. Even though that's probably the more profitable way of doing things, by saying, oh, you want to learn this amazing weathering tutorial, well, you've now got to pay me money for it. Instead, I'm just always going to produce those videos and have them free on YouTube for everyone. But if you like what I do and want to throw me some money, that will be appreciated.
Absolutely. You will do a fine dance in return for it, right?
Well, exactly. And it just means, the dream is if I'll just be able to produce more videos, because I'll be able to spend less time working and more time making videos for people.
That is the dream,
If people
isn't
don't
it?
want it, then that's fine, and I'll just carry on at my sort of slow, plodding pace.
And on the topic of slow plodding I can't even say it. Slow plodding paces is, of course, the incredibly graceful, magically superb, vulnerable, but also oh so masculine Joseph. How you doing, mate?
I'm all right.
I've realised through the process of throwing you compliments that I'm almost always saying that you're graceful, which is obviously an inbuilt thing that I believe about you. I think one time I saw you boogie about and I realised that you have the grace of a ballerina, and I feel like you need to be informed of it at every available opportunity.
If that ballerina was also some kind of like giant mammal, then maybe like husky.
A husky ballerina.
Yeah, but not like the dog, because obviously that's not a mammal. Like an elephant.
Like an elephant. A husky elephant in a tutu.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a cartoon of that already.
I'm pretty
somewhere.
sure there is, yeah. I definitely remember there was like a hippo in a tutu in like one of the Disney cartoons back in the day.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily recall the elephant. But maybe there was. Maybe it was in like an episode of Topspin.
Yeah,
Who could say?
Is there ever an episode of this podcast where you don't reference an old television show?
No.
It is a recurring theme I've noticed with you, Dan.
Well, I like old telly because that's the telly that I remember. You know, maybe I should do a podcast about old telly, but I won't do that. But yeah, on the topic of old telly, maybe anyone out there was confused last week by my buzzer that I did. Admittedly, it was a very apt buzzer because I think it perfectly distilled my contribution to the podcast and my own kind of inflated sense of self-worth. But nonetheless, yeah, that was taken from an episode of Rocco's Modern Life, where the gang was given the opportunity to create their own cartoon series, and Sheldon couldn't come up with a decent enough character, except that he did conceive of the cheese, which only contribution was that it was believed to be the best character and shouted over the other members, declaring how great it is. So for whatever reason, I felt like that was the most appropriate thing for me to use to represent myself in a quiz. Who would afford it?
Like the lead Ed from Ed, Ed and Eddie.
That's it, you see, maybe that's it. Which of the Eddies would you be, though, then, Joe?
Obviously, I'd like to be the one that's not the giant special needs one, but I think within our group, that's probably the direction it's heading.
I think it probably is, really. I think as it goes, you're definitely the bucktooth one. Unfortunately, I'm the ugly loud one, and Phil is the beautiful gifted genius, right, Phil?
No, thanks very much.
There you go.
Or Plank.
Or Plank. What? Oh yeah, because that was the thing, wasn't it? The dumb one had his plank, didn't he?
Yeah. Or can I change my cartoon? Can we do Recess? Because there's more usable characters in there.
Which one would you be in Recess? Would you be Gus?
I'd like to be TJ because I like him. Used to wear my cap backwards and then put my quiff through the gap where you button it up.
Yeah.
There
we go. I think a lot of kids did that back in the time when you were a child, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely remember having done that. I bet even hipster Phil would have even have done that, I imagine.
Yeah.
Did you wear a cap back in the day, Phil?
A cap? What
kind? An American baseball cap, Phil.
Do you know, I'm sure I did, but I don't think I wore it backwards because I wasn't one of the cool kids.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I see. Well, there we go. Yep. I misrepresented Phil there. I apologise to everyone.
Thank you.
It's all right. There we go. But yeah, anyway, there you go. So so what have you been up to lately, Joe? What's been going on in your life?
I've managed to finally build all of my Gakari units. Now it's the grind of finding time to actually paint it all. I discovered that my airbrush is absolutely useless. So it all has to be done by hand.
All by hand it is then. But no man, that sounds interesting though. I mean, obviously you've been so busy that you can't even contribute to the next section, can you?
No.
For two reasons. One, you didn't come to WarhammerFest, and two, you were too busy to even talk about it retrospectively.
I know. But the people need a break from me.
You know what I think it is, Joe? I think now that you're about to appear on Winters SEO's YouTube channel, I think you've got a bit too big time for us. Isn't that the case?
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm going to become like one of those travelling stars now, and I'm just popping up everywhere. Even uninvited, you'll be watching this morning, and then Phil and Holly will just be there on the sofa, and my head will just slowly arise from the back.
There you go. And then you'll be there painting a model, rattling the paints around as you're doing so in the back of this morning.
I don't do that.
No, obviously not.
Why would you insinuate such things?
But do you know when the Winters thing is all becoming reality when you're doing that?
I've already done it. We're just waiting. I was waiting for it to go live. I think that's going to be next week. It'll be going up.
Well, we'll put a link in the description anyway for anyone who isn't aware of Winters SEO. By all accounts, you had a lovely time, didn't you, Joe?
Oh, I did. It's a very lovely man. He's well accommodating. I got to drink lots of tea, play some games.
I admire his general sense of optimism when it concerns inviting strangers into his home to play games.
Well, that is a weird concept when you really break it down. So I just messaged him on Facebook and I said I'm a big fan and I want to come on your show and I live just down the road, so it'd be great. And it'd be yeah, we'll arrange a time, and then you just turn up.
He gives you his address and you just go to his house.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to turn up and try and like carve his face off and wear it like a mask, that would be it, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's very trusting when you really think about it. But it all pays off because you get to spend like 8 hours in a warm room with him, and you just get to geek out for a day whilst being filmed.
Was he sinewy in the warm room?
Sinewy.
Sinewy, you know. Did he look impressive with a sweat on?
Oh, like the Diet Coke man.
Yeah, like the Diet Coke man. Did he have that sort of vibe?
Yeah, just a general man bod. I don't know if that makes it sound really weird and creepy, but I'm pretty sure we're already there.
No, indeed.
So,
did he smell nice?
oh yeah. I think the problem is though, it was a very hot day, and the nerd funk was real.
Was that just from you though?
Mainly.
You do have that weird kind of thing, Joe, because you live with too many cats that when you start getting sweaty, you have sweaty cat smell.
Oh. That's nice to know. That's great to find out for the first time on the podcast that hopefully thousands of people will listen to.
Nah, you don't really, Joe. You don't really.
That's the fear. The problem is when you have got cats and you invite people around your house for the first time.
Yeah.
I often find myself lighting scented candles and like opening the windows for a while, so they don't think you're mental.
Well, there you go. Well, that's a good insight, if nothing else. I mean, it is. I mean, cats give off a very specific kind of musk, though, don't they? You know, there's definitely that cat aroma. Anyway, there you go. Well, that's exciting. Well, I look forward to learning more about when you appear on Winters' channel. Can you do a spoiler, Joe? What army did you take?
I took my Death Watch.
And what did Sir Winters take?
And he has his Tyranids.
Amazing.
We did a nice thematic game. And I won't spoil it for you. I won't say what happened, but it was very
foolish.
Yeah, you have to watch it and find out what happens. I took Death Watch mainly because it's currently my only fully painted army. So, but I have arranged that I will be going back again in November, hopefully with my painted Dakari. So hopefully you get me twice in 1 year. Whee.
There you go. I'm sure everyone will be very excited about that. Obviously, you can listen to Joe all year round on the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, but you can see him in a sweaty box room somewhere in the southwest.
You could go back and watch some of our really creepy battle reports that we did on the YouTube channel.
Oh, those are terrifying. Those are probably terrifying. I am very excited about the prospect of what we're hopefully going to achieve in there in terms of like production space and actually what we can do, because I think it'd be nice to just even have it just for our own amusement. I'm thinking more live streaming than edited battle reports, but that's a conversation for another time. Again, it would be cool to get people to come along and play games against us, but I'm not sure if I'm super keen, based on all the prior statements of giving my address out to people to randomly turn up.
I think we could start off by just playing with ourselves, and then, and then
like so many people, yeah, absolutely. You got to learn somehow.
And then we can invite friends over. We could play with our friends.
Play back to back.
Yeah, and then we can get all voyeuristic and invite strangers around.
Exactly, you know? We could go out to the clubs and try and find someone to bring home with us.
We could get a whole bunch of tables, put our keys in a giant fishbowl.
Oh yeah,
and our opponents that way.
Amazing. Well, there we go. I'm glad we We clarified all of that. Right, anyway, this intro is probably taking way too long, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So Joe's going away in a moment, because for all the aforementioned reasons, far too busy, big time, Hollywood superstar now, no time for the Lookout Sir 40k podcast. So we're going to be joined by the gorgeous Timothy. So Tim is making a return. He joined us at WarhammerFest because he's a reliable, trustworthy, healthy young boy. And he has opinions that he will share. Sorry, Joe, you keep sounding like you're going to interrupt with something. Please speak up.
I was going to say that he is the gorgeous African sunset.
Yes.
With his auburn hair. Well, it's not really auburn, is it? It's shining gold hair.
They are. The gingery locks of Tim.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's going to be on with me and Phil, and we're going to talk about WarhammerFest and all the news that went around there. So we're not going to be doing a news segment this week. We're just going to be talking about WarhammerFest. And then after that, we're going to be talking about future predictions for things we'd like to see in 2019, because while we were at WarhammerFest, one of the things that was really cool was that the Chaos Knight book was revealed, and they spoke about the prospect of what could be coming in the future, or not what could be coming, but the open-ended opportunity of all sorts of things could be happening going forwards, which got us to thinking, what might that be like? And we had a conversation about it, which you will hear should you want to listen to it. So that's going to be coming up as well. And then, because Richie has a life outside of the 40k podcast, or the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, we're not going to be able to bring you the quiz this week. Boo! Boo, Richie, boo! So with that all said, guys, now let's move on to the first segment of the 21st episode of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast. Transitional noise. Woo! So, as should hopefully be no surprise, we're going to talk about WarhammerFest roughly 2 weeks later than when it happened. So obviously all of this is really old news now. And as we saw from conversations on Reddit, we shouldn't be talking about stuff that happened 2 weeks ago because it's just darn boring. But then we did a survey, and it seems like everything's fine. So there's a bunch of unnecessary context that probably doesn't mean anything to the greater majority of people. But it means something to me and Phil, doesn't it, Phil?
Yeah, vaguely.
Exactly. And that's all that really matters. It doesn't matter. And so on. Tim's joining us, because Tim came to WarhammerFest with us, didn't you, Tim?
I did. Hello.
Oh, it's Tim. What have you been doing lately, Tim? What's going on in Timland?
Coming up with new ideas for new armies. I'm trying to really just settle into something. I've been on a bit of a, I wouldn't say hobby hiatus, but I haven't been able to decide what my next project's going to be.
Hobby
but
hiccup.
A hobby hiccup, as you might say. But WarhammerFest did help to hone my my, how should I say, my new direction.
Your new direction. There you go. I look forward to hearing more about that in a moment. So yeah, WarhammerFest was an event that took place in Coventry within the confines of the UK. It was the replacement, or is the replacement, to the ongoing series of events known as Games Day, it appears. So if any of you out there are familiar with the olden times of Warhammer and Games Workshop, this is New Games Day, WarhammerFest, which, unlike Games Day, is not necessarily such a large communal event for the business as a whole. Me and Phil were saying on the way back from WarhammerFest that we remember the olden days of, the stores getting all involved and, you're getting on a coach with your local kind of hobby centre scene and travelling up to what was the NEC back in the day. And, well, actually, I think also as well there were other venues, but let's just say the NEC for the sake of argument, and, engaging in all sorts of hobby fun. This is a relatively smaller type of event, although gathering in scale, it's fair to say. It felt relatively big. I mean, it's 3 floors of the Rico Arena, so it's not insignificant. But yeah, we're going to just round up what we thought of the event, talk about some of the news that came out of it, and hopefully enlighten you all and maybe encourage you to go or not go in the future. Wouldn't that sound about right to everyone involved in this conversation?
Yeah.
Yep, that sounds good.
Wonderful. There you go. Beautiful summary. I've already forgotten what I've said before, but let's talk about the first of the things. So we didn't actually go till Sunday, did we? So we all went up on Sunday. Relatively early start to the day, but nothing too terrible. The alarm went off at 6:30, which is a relative oddity for a Sunday morning. I believe Tim was already on his way by that time, though, right, Tim?
Yeah, I was always already making my way to you, half awake, just on autopilot, really.
Well, I'm very happy to see and note that you arrived very much alive, so that was very good. Phil was probably the latest start, being the closest to the Midlands. So, were you even awake at 6:30, Phil?
Do you know what? I'm trying to think. Only just. Yeah, I think I woke up around 6:30 in preparation for Richard coming to pick me up at 7:30.
There we go. So both me and Phil were being collected by two different individuals and taken to the place that is Coventry's Ricoh Arena. But anyway, nonetheless, relatively early start. But the day before, on the Saturday, lots of lovely news came out. So we were already pretty excited about what was to come. The first of the things that they announced in the news segment of WarhammerFest was, well, I mean, to be honest with you, the first thing they announced was, look, here's us unboxing pop vinyl figures. Are they pop vinyl figures or just pop figures? Why have I got vinyl in my head? Where did that come from? Did that used to be a thing?
Don't you mean Funko Pops?
Yeah, Funko Pops. Why do I say pop vinyl? What was that? Was that a thing once?
Is that not the material that it's made out of? Like, obviously not actual vinyls, but it's like a type of plastic.
We'll go with that. There
right.
Must be some reason or context that's what I used to call them. Nonetheless, they announced they had some pop stuff there, which obviously was available everywhere. And that they had a long queue. That was kind of what happened there. But the first of the things that were significant and exciting was, of course, the new Citadel Colours contrast paint range. So that was announced. How did we feel about that? Were we excited to discover the wondrous world of contrast? Phil, you're the most paintery of all, although to be fair, Tim is also quite a prolific painter. What was your opinions, gents, in the advance of heading to Warhammer Fest? Were you excited to discover more about contrast?
It looked interesting and seemed like a cool concept. We'd been speculating for a while what it might be. The general expectation was it'd be some kind of dip dye method, a bit like the Army Painter sort of all-in-one wash, which is sort of what this does, but it's all colour specific and isn't actually just a wash. It does the base layer for highlights and the shade all in one. And I think I was a little bit hesitant from the initial photos because it looks okay, but not great, I would say. And then when I actually looked at some of the models, I was like, yeah, it's okay. And then I looked at some more models and I was like, oh, actually, these are really good. And Richard, who isn't with us in the chat, he was with me as well when we were looking at it and speaking to some of the Colour Lab experts later on in the day. And that was really interesting. And he's super excited about it. It seems like it'd be quite a good method. But overall, I think it's almost too early to tell what you can do with it, because so they had a bunch of armies on display that had been painted within literally the last 2 weeks, and at most they'd spent like sort of 10 to 15 hours building and painting these 1,500 point armies, I guess, or thereabouts. And that was all like studio staff, for example. So it seems like even they haven't had that long with contrast paint themselves. It's just the lab technicians that created it have been there the longest that know how it works.
I'm really interested to see what the pro painter community come up with it, because I know it's there to sort of as an access doorway, if you will, into like getting a painted army onto the tabletop. But I think there is a lot of things you can do with it. As you say, it's just early days, and I think the pros will be leading the way, as it were. They're quite a creative bunch.
Totally. I saw so the lab expert had shown us a head. It was just painted in a flesh tone, and he was like, this is their base white method with a flesh tone on top. And he was like, it took me like minutes, like if that. And it looked really impressive. It looked like someone spent a long time either painting it by hand using like layers and highlights, or using a kind of very because it is very similar to an older method, which is you undercoat something white and then use a very thin wash over the top to sort of glaze it several times. It seems to do it all in one.
Was it very similar to like the Hexwraith paints that they've already brought out, or was it a bit thicker? Because I admit I didn't play with it because it's not something that appeals to me. I appreciate what it is, but
I got the impression it was an extension of that. But Dan, you actually got to paint some models with it. I didn't get a chance to get any hands-on testing myself. So what did you think about it? Is it quite thick?
Yeah, so I bunked out of the one of the last seminars of the day. So we booked in to see a Horus Heresy seminar at around, I think it was 2:00. And I was like, nah, I can't be bothered with that. I'm going to go and muck around with paints and talk to, designers and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, paint-wise, consistency, it's definitely somewhere between a wash and your standard kind of Citadel acrylic paint. It's an interesting thing because it's quite deceptive, I suppose, because you do need to have much more paint on your brush than you would otherwise think is accurate or rather correct. So it's quite a new kind of mindset, I suppose, because really you don't want to try and paint with it like you would a traditional acrylic paint, because ultimately the point of this is to have it run and to, ultimately seep into the details and distinguish those details through the process of, the paint doing what it's designed to do. The other thing that's super interesting about it that you become aware of as you start using it is the technicians, as we're lovingly calling them, although to be fair, I think they were just broad event staff who were given 2 minutes notice before the show opened. But nonetheless, the guys working there were like, yeah, you definitely don't want to mix it with any water. And you're like, what do you mean you don't want to mix it with any water? And that's another thing to start getting your head around, is that, yeah, this the technology, if you will, within this paint does not respond properly to water dilution. So if you want to dilute the colour in any way, you have to use their special contrast medium, which was not available at the show, but was referenced as the desired method for producing this.
I did actually see it there. They because the lab people were actual, like the guys behind the paints, so I do think they were.
Yeah, so I'm talking more about the sampling area. So it wasn't available to us on the sampling side of things. We had 10 colours available to us. I painted a Poxwalker, and it, came out all right. I mean, again, I was using the the Nurgle kind of, the Death Guard green is to do the flesh, and then I was using like the orange to kind of, paint over that to accentuate all the boils and pustules and things on the creature. And to be honest with you, the results didn't seem remarkably different from what I could have achieved if I was using old wash techniques over white undercoats. But where I really saw it shine is where you see some of the more vibrant colours. So I saw some guys experimenting with the reds, and I mean, again, it's incredible to see how quickly you can paint things like blood letters using this paint method. I think, again, as Phil also said as well, flesh tones for human heads or whatever. If you've got those Space Marines that have got the exposed human heads poking out from all that armor, I can definitely see there being value to this. So I think, again, I mean, ultimately, having played around with it, you realise very early that you wouldn't want to use it exclusively, but then what paint would you use exclusively? I mean, you always want to mix up your techniques and your methodologies. So I think ultimately
it's sort of designed to replace that kind of base layer process, in addition to the wash method and your sort of edge highlighting that you might do. And what was interesting with the colour range is a lot of them are quite pastel-y in kind of their colours in terms of how they look once they're painted on, because I had a whole cabinet full of every single paint in the new range painted on a Space Marine, so you could see how they looked. And the colours that seemed to me to work the best and look the most correct were the really dark colours, so the reds, the greens, and even the black. And I was there chatting to a guy called Eddie, who I think he won the Vehicle Golden Demon last year. And he's a Krieg player as well, so obviously that's why I bumped into him and had a chat with him. And he was like, he wants to do Death Watch, and he's like, I'm going to try this out, because actually painting black will be a lot easier with this. And even if you then go, I'm going to still manually paint on edge highlights afterwards, I've still got this. The contrast highlights give you a guide for where you should then be putting your highlights, your edge highlights on the model. So that was quite impressive to see.
You do have to be pretty careful with the pooling, though, don't you? It's not so great on flat surfaces. That should definitely be something that should be mentioned.
You would say that, but then me and Richard were chatting to the lab guys, and he had a Redemptor Dreadnought, and it was all painted, sort of painted in ultramarine blue, but it was painted using contrast paints. And we were like, oh no, this edge highlight looks too good. It can't be. And he was like, oh no, that's all contrast paint. So it can be, but I think you do have to probably be careful when it's drying, to make sure it doesn't pull up too much, especially in flat areas. So I think you will have to be careful, because a lot of the models do look a bit hit and miss. So some of them look like they've got really heavy pooling on the model, and because you put a special formulated white base coat on, and then you do one thick coat, is how they're saying the method is. You apply that to the model and let it dry, but it feels like if you're doing just that, it is a bit hit and miss as to whether it's going to be very pooly, or it looks really good. So I think there'd be a lot of practice involved in terms of managing that drying process. And apparently it actually dries really quickly, like sort of within 3 or 4 minutes.
If I was going to use it, it would definitely be worth doing the wet blending method, where you have a wet brush just on the side.
Yeah, but again, to the point, if you start adding that in, it's gonna disrupt the formula of the paint. As again, they said water, so wet blending, all that stuff. Again, theoretically, if you're using, I mean, again, I don't know how you'd achieve that with the use of their medium stuff, but again, the water stuff is kind of off the table.
Yeah, I guess you
but
just want to use a brush to dab it in the pooled area, and that will soak up the excess paint.
You can. Yeah, fine. So yeah, I mean, there are methods that you can utilize. I think the thing is, I think with this, there is a certain degree of luck involved in the outcome as well. I think you're going to have, if you paint 3 models with this technique, they're probably going to look slightly different. They'll probably have slightly different levels of color and again, very slight. I mean, they had a Craftworld Elder army in the cabinet that they painted a kind of light bone color. And that definitely had a lot of kind of ghostly, kind of misty kind of paint effects on it where the paint had dried. And one of the other dilemmas is trying to work out what then you actually kind of cover that stuff up with. So in the old method of I paint this, ultramarines blue, and then I apply null oil, and then where the null oil is kind of dried, where you've missed some of the pooling and it's gone all sort of misty and speckly, like you just take your ultramarines blue and then paint over it, and that creates that nice kind of raised area that works quite well. The problem is with this is, I mean, again, in this example, you could use the ultramarines contrast paint, but is that going to be, the layer that you're left with, is that the same color as ultramarines blue exactly, or are you going to find that if you try and patch over that or paint over the top of it, is it going to look remarkably different? I think that's going to be one of the elements that's going to be really interesting, is how, because again, when I was painting this thing, I painted the Poxwalker, I painted some of the pouches, and I used this darker brown, and I put just a little bit of it, touched its finger, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, well, I've accidentally painted on his finger, and then I realised, well, I can't use the contrast paint that I used to paint that finger originally and fix this problem. I've actually seemingly got to re-undercoat it white and then reapply the contrast paint on top. So again,
that was their method that they said, is you have to reapply the white and then put the contrast paint back on, because that's the only way to get that kind of correct color. So it seems like you do have to be quite accurate with your painting if you want a good job, especially if you're doing multiple contrast paints on one model. If you're doing, for example, a Corn Demon where you're just painting it all red, it's not really a problem, because then all the other details you could actually get away with just using your normal layers and base colors. And that's the thing with this thing, is it's another technique. It does replace a method, which is your basic method, but actually it really is a complementary technical skill that you'll just be adding into your repertoire of different painting techniques. Because like you said, you were saying if you want to paint Custodes, it's still just quicker to spray gold from a rattle can and then wash it. Like, there is no metallic colours within the contrast paint range. The best you'll get is a sort of a grey colour. So you still need to do all of those things separately. And like I said, there will be some methods for certain armies which you'd be better off using traditional techniques. And then some other armies, such as like if you want to do a ghostly color scheme, or like maybe Marines, or like I said, demons or orcs, for example, they would actually benefit from this one quite well, I think.
No, I totally agree. I think, again, at the end of the day, it's a great new addition to the paint range, and again, having mucked around with it, I'm looking forward to, getting more exposure to it and trying to use it more in my own kind of painting and collection, as it were, because, again, it will assist me. And again, for someone like Richard, who, Quizmaster Richie, he just loves it, because, again, he's someone who famously is painting armies in, the span of 24 hours, which is an astonishing thing to see happen. So now he can take his incredibly quick processes and maybe even reduce it further still and produce even greater results, which is a mad thing to believe. But all very good. So next on, in terms of things they announced, and this is on the Saturday before we arrived, so on and so forth, they had a couple 40k updates. So first and foremost, they reminded us again that Apocalypse is still happening. There were some cards, some dice, and some confirmation of all the stuff that we knew already, as well as them inviting us to come to Warhammer World. Not us specifically, but us, the community. I speak, of course, of every one of us who are able to travel to Nottingham in August. You have been invited by Warhammer community to take part in the record-breaking game of Warhammer 40,000. So, Phil, Tim, will either of you be going along and taking part in this game?
I'd be quite interested. I'd need to know the details, and it was one of many things at this Warhammer Fest where they announced something and had literally no information about it, but just said, check Warhammer community at some point in the future and we'll let you know about it. So seems like a cool concept. Might be up for it depending on how it actually logistic-wise works.
Yeah.
But there's no more detail, so you can't say.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think as well, in terms of the Apocalypse side of things, I mean, we covered this in a previous episode. I personally am not that interested in Apocalypse. I think it's a system I very rarely utilise. Maybe I would go up and take part in this game in August just to be part of the whole record-breaking game, because it sounds quite interesting, but at the same time, my experience with Apocalypse is always very negative, and I always find it a little bit of a slog to play, but who knows, maybe this will change that. But even then, the idea of having to kind of look at, bring so many models and do all that is not hugely appealing to me, but who knows, we shall see. Tim, you interested in Apocalypse? You're going to be picking up your Apocalypse box and so on and so forth?
No, unfortunately, the dubstep advertisement didn't win it for me.
No?
No, so much.
What amount of dubstep did you need? Did you need less or more dub?
I just needed a little bit less and a little bit more about the actual product and how it was going to play. That would have been quite nice. It's not that I'm against Apocalypse. It's just one, I don't have the models to field like an Apocalypse game, and I quite like the unit-based sort of troop-based action at the moment.
I should have said wob rather than dub as well. I realised my mistake there, but nonetheless, I mean, it was just them going, "Hey, remember we told you Apocalypse is coming? It's still coming.
It's still coming. Yeah.
Look at there's more dice." And again, it was really disappointing that within the confines of Warhammer Fest there were no test games for it. It wasn't like they were putting any kind of spectacle on. I mean, again, going back to Games Day, I went to Games Day in, I want to say 2007, maybe 2008. It might have actually been 2008, but regardless, I went to Games Day, and that was when they were doing a big push around Apocalypse in, here it is, gentlemen, 5th edition. That's right. Although, actually, no, it wasn't 5th edition, it was 4th edition. End of 4th edition, I think it was, that they did this. Or maybe it was 5th. But regardless, they had a big push around Apocalypse, and they had all these boxes. And I always remember they had this remarkable demo game where they'd taken this big blue sheet of plastic or whatever. So they'd gotten this this kind of clear, well, not clear, but they got this blue kind of I'm trying to think of the word now, like a blanket almost of like this blue kind of like plasticky
Tarp or something?
Yeah, tarp's the word I couldn't find there. Thank you, Phil. And what they'd done is they'd sellotape that down, or rather duct tape that down to the floor, and then they'd created all these islands out of like terrain and stuff, and they made this beautiful kind of like beach continent, and they had a apocalypse game of Elder versus Imperium, with like massive Wraith Knights, and not Wraith Knights back then, but like Titans and stuff jumping across the water, and skimmers flying over, just attacking this base on a kind of beachhead type, well not beachhead, but on a beach situation. And that was part of the whole thing of just one of the many things they did at Games Day years ago to promote the existing apocalypse. And I just remember looking at that thinking, that looked like such a cool game of 40k. Within the confines of the Apocalypse rule set, and I was like, that's really inspiring and amazing, and something I'd love to jump in and get involved in. Whereas at WarhammerFest, they went, look, there's a video, yeah, it's still happening, check back later. So
yeah, there was a few bits of detail that we learned that they hadn't announced beforehand, and it was things like, so basically from the shooting phase, like the damage that you take doesn't kill your model until the end of your turn, so you will always get a turn of shooting where you won't get, like, even if you're getting tabled, you still get to counter that. So the turn one shooting is now no longer as damaging as it used to be, which is good, and that is almost like an interesting rule if they ported that over to 40k. And then they also said basically all the rules are free for your units. They'll be available online and you just download them, which sounds good, but potentially you might have a load of stuff that you've got to print out. Who knows how that's going to work. They didn't show you any of the stats or rules. They sort of go, you get a big deck of cards. These are, a lot of them, a bit like sort of tactical cards that you play during your opponent's turn, so there's less downtime for you. So as your opponent's shooting at you, you can then be countering his actions with some cards that allow you to do stuff, which seems interesting, but again, there was no examples of what they are. And they also said there's a bunch of dice. They use like D12s, I think they now got in the box, as well as D6s, and a bunch of tokens. And they were like, don't worry, you don't all need a box, but one box is enough tokens for about 2 people. So in a way that's good, but at the same time it's a bit disappointing, because actually if you're doing Apocalypse, there's probably going to be 4 people minimum. So that's actually 2 boxes that you need to buy, rather than just say, one set of rules. So maybe you can get around that with making up tokens for yourself. I don't know. But it'd be nice to have seen more about it.
There you go. So something else that they announced is a new version of the Repulsor. So the Repulsor Executioner is a massive frontline battle tank with a very small transport capacity. Do either of you care about the Repulsor Executioner?
No.
Brilliant.
Do you know what? I quite like the look of it. It's odd that it's also still got the Gatling cannon on it, though.
Do you? Like, to me, it's just they've taken a Repulsor and, they've gone, you know what? Let's just add more guns, like they did in the actual seminar. It's just, it's not what the the Primaris range needed, in my mind. Like, it's cool that they're bringing out new stuff and new transportation, but I don't know, it seems a bit of a lazy design to me.
I don't necessarily think I'd go so far as to call it lazy, because it's very much in the same vein of what we've seen from, Imperial tanks in the past, right? They have the basic Rhino chassis, and then they add stuff to it. So this is very much the same sort of vein. And again, one of the things that is always funny to note is that, basically it seems like they've completely and utterly, well, not utterly, but they've basically done a whole new turret set for this thing. So it's the same, base model with an entirely new turret, and the turret that it has now is quite a bit bigger than a fair bit bigger than the turret that was on the regular Repulsor.
It looks better proportioned, I think, the new one, in comparison to the old one, but it's still festooned with stuff on it, like all the grenade launchers and stuff, which I'm not massively keen on. I presume you can leave those off if you want.
Look
a bit better.
Yeah, no, they're kind of
Gone.
they're kind of essential to the well, I think they're in the models. They're likely to be in the models profile for game purposes. But
Yes.
this is the thing with this thing, though, right? It's very similar to the vein of what a predator is to a rhino, or what a whirlwind is to a rhino, and so on and so forth, right? It's the basic rhino chassis with extra bits bolted on top. This is the same here, but it doesn't necessarily remarkably change the design, where there is quite a noticeable difference between a predator and a rhino. I think that you could be mistaken or easily unable to tell the difference between this and a regular repulsor, other than the fact that obviously it does have a big gun on it. But yeah, the repulsor is so covered in guns, it sort of is what it is. But nonetheless, I mean, the assurances that we received when we were in this seminar that we keep referring to, just to be clear, we went to a Warhammer 40,000 Q&A on Sunday. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, they talked about this there, and they essentially went, yeah, it's got a big tank-killing gun and a big plasma sort of gun, which is what you would expect from a big plasma gun. So again, no rules have obviously been released for this, but it just seems like a repulsor, which was a tank covered in guns with extra guns, which is fine. It's the same problem, or the same kind of design concept, if you will, that Marines have been undergoing for a while now, which is when they introduced the Centurion, they just were like, it's a Marine covered in guns. The repulsor is a tank covered in guns with yet more guns, which, again, I mean, if you're the kind of person who really, really loves that aspect of the Marines, then this is great for you. I have a small contingency of Marine stuff. I'm probably not going to be falling over myself to buy this model, because I took one look at the amount of components within the repulsor kit and was like, I'm really not sure I want to build one of these. But nonetheless, maybe, just maybe, if it's amazing, I will pick it up. But based on the look of the model, I'm not really that bothered. But I'm sure it's okay. I mean, I've heard people are really excited about it. Personally, I'm indifferent to it, but I'm sure it'll do what it says on the tin, if nothing else.
Did they allude that it was going to be a part transport as well? Like,
Yeah.
Yes, but have less of a transport capacity than the original one.
Yes, that was it. They didn't let slip like how many. It was just.
No, but I
guess it
imagine
would
the
be
current
5.
one's 10, right? So it'd be 5, I would have thought.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's
10
a bit
Primaris.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, the old repulsor is transport capacity 10. This one will probably go to 5. So it's like the Razorback to the Rhino. Although if it is like the Razorback, it'll be transport capacity 6, which is actually quite useful, because then you get a nice little 5-man squad and a character in there, which is no bad thing.
I was going to say, depending on points wise, we might actually see him cropping into the field a bit, but.
Yeah, it just seems a bit counterintuitive that you've got a heavy sort of tank that would traditionally be sort of sat at the back just shooting. Because it's got a transport capacity, you probably want it to be moving forwards. So it feels a bit odd. So it'd be interesting if there's a rule that has a ignore the minus, to hit penalty for heavy weapons. Or do they all have that anyway due to the machine spirit?
Yes, they do, yeah. So they already have that.
Lucky Space Marines.
Lucky old Space Marines. The thing I will say is it's not that remarkable an archetype within the game, because obviously Razorbacks have already had that. That sort of.
This is more like a Predator with a transport capacity.
Well, you say that. Wait until maybe you see the Repulsor Predator.
No.
Wait until that comes around. That thing's going to terrify you.
What about the Repulsor Land Raider?
Oh, yeah, the Repulsor Land Raider comes along. I thought that existed on Forgeworld, right? That massive thing.
The big super heavy one on Forgeworld doesn't have a transport capacity, even though it looks like it should.
No, really?
I'm pretty sure it doesn't.
Ah,
The
so
rules are
GW.
available on Forgeworld, so you can check it out.
All right.
Well, there you go.
So GW are going to do their own Primaris Land Raider then.
There you go. You heard it here first. Officially confirmed by Tim. And on the topic of transports, or things without transport capacities, because it can come in various flavours, I assume, the glorious Adeptus Mechanicus Scutari people got themselves their very first lovely transport, which was met with some initial apprehension, I would say. I don't know. I mean, I think the majority of people would tell you that they really love this, and I'm certainly amongst that majority. I think it's a really cool-looking, unique vehicle. But I was surprised, because I had not expected that, the Mechanicum would use a hovercraft. What do you reckon, gents?
I quite like the idea of the hovercraft creeping in. It's a different aspect that we haven't seen in 40k. Probably would have been better if it was like turbine hovercraft ability, so more like a skimmer that is sitting on some turbines underneath. But I like it. I know Phil was a bit adverse to it.
Oh, look at that. Throwing shade at Phil. Phil,
Well,
do you hate it?
It's growing on me, and when I first saw it, I wasn't too sure about the skirting aspects of it, but I think what they're doing is they're doing a very sort of retro futuristic vibe, a bit like the big robot guys who are sort of like dorky 60s sci-fi. This is like you're in the 60s, and what's cool in the 60s was probably hovercraft was like a thing back in those days. Now just make a space version of that, like the far future. So in that respect, it looks good. It doesn't necessarily feel like it fits in with the current range with everything's on walkers, but I think they're taking it in a good direction. And it's very much like the sort of World War II landing craft. And I've already seen someone do a kind of Krieg Photoshop version because people will be wanting to use it for that as well, I could imagine.
Is it as soon as you saw that you started warming to it?
No, but it made me realise that I had always planned to do my own kind of landing craft version, but like a kind of conversion for the Chimera. And this sort of does that already. But obviously, I think if this had tracks on, it would be even better than the hovercraft version. But I think it's still good.
I think the broad consensus when it concerns the good people of the Mechanicum is that they're always kind of reappropriating all different types of technology, aren't they? Because it's kind of their thing. So even though this might seem quite archaic or quite bizarre to us based on our relative understanding of, you know, modern and old technologies, maybe to the Skitarii this was just one of the many things that they had access to, and they were just like, yeah, whatever, we'll just put guns on it, right? Whatever.
Well, there's the Scorpius Disintegrator, which is the other variant you can build within the kit, which is much more of a battle tank. So there's no transport capacity, and it's all sealed in, whereas the transport version is like an open-topped landing craft. And this one's got a big gun on the top. And this version looks a bit more dorkier, I have to say. It's got like these weird missile racks at the front. I think honestly the photograph doesn't do it justice, and it actually looks better in person, which is what I say the majority of the time when I don't like a model. It's the photograph just looks a bit rubbish. It's like, so later on, I guess we might cover Deep Root Strong Branch when they preview the Blood Bowl stuff. When that model, like the photo looks awful, but the model itself looks really good.
Well, you know, that's probably about as much as we'll say about our Deep Root Strong Branch, because you know,
because it's not 40k.
It's not 40k, so we don't really talk about it here. But there you go, you squeezed it in there.
So we talk about WarhammerFest. That's included in the WarhammerFest chat.
Well, fair enough. There it was.
I'll be interested to see like the weapon profile of the Skitarii like transport.
Yeah.
Which one, for like the autocannon looking thing or the multiple heavy stubbers? Why do the Mechanicum cover everything in stubbers, eh? Can't they get a good gun anywhere?
It's the go-to weapon, isn't it?
It's the thing.
There you go. And then lastly in this series of updated things, although not technically lastly because they also did a update concerning the Sisters of Battle, or the Adeptus Sororitas, or whatever they're now called. But, you know, really, them having painted a model that they revealed a while ago, though it looks gorgeous, doesn't necessarily need overly large amounts of comments put around it. Unless, does anyone have any opinions that are worth airing on her there, the Sister of Battle?
It's nice. They do talk about it as in, we spent a lot of time painting this up because this going forward is the colour scheme that we're using as sort of the template for all future sisters. So, you know, that's interesting. And I think they talk about how they painted it in a little bit of detail, but beyond that, it looks nice.
It is a gorgeous sculpt and model now.
Did you notice, Phil, that this model, like other models, has candles on its base? They're taking hints from you, mate.
Clearly, they saw that video I made only a few weeks ago, and they are copying me via a time machine.
There you go. They triggered and understood that you would come up with a great idea and started incorporating it into their own works. Because it's her and the Necromunda fella, right?
Yes.
Yes.
House
yeah.
corridor chap covered in candles. But yeah, on the topic of things that are covered in candles, here's something that probably isn't: the Chaos Knights. So when I first saw Chaos Knights, I just immediately assumed, oh, that's a really impressive upgrade kit for regular knights. But then it became quite apparent when you actually looked at them proper. Oh my, this is quite clearly an entirely new knight kit, isn't it? So that's quite cool.
Have you noticed that the legs are completely different and they're double jointed? And
Yeah. Well,
chicken-like.
that was one of the clues that led me to believe that it was a whole new kit, as was the whole, slew of different, panels and things that clearly aren't just, little swaps here and there. I mean, even fundamentally, aspects of the torso and things are small differences, but they are quite apparent. So, yeah, no, it's really cool to see the new kind of stuff that is entering into 40k. I mean, obviously, a lot of us were under the impression that 40k had all of its codexes, and then lo and behold, there is more now to come, and Chaos Knight seemingly is the first of those new exciting things. So, yeah, really excited to see what these guys can do. I imagine, Tim, you're most excited because you came away saying you're actually going to start collecting these things. Is that not correct?
That is correct. What I'm really hoping for is a bit more information about the Dark Mechanicum in the book. Even if it's just like a paragraph, just a little bit more info would be amazing. But yeah, I'm most certainly going to pick one up and make it a key item of my army, or my new army, I should say.
Your new army, the Chaos Knights. I was going to say as well, old Richie had actually started collecting Chaos Knights as well. He bought one of the Forge World ones to run as renegades, so I imagine he's quite excited. Phil, you're a keen collector of knights that hasn't yet managed to finish painting one of your Imperial Knights.
Or building one, in fact.
Well, you've more or less finished building it. I mean, you've got a few sub-assemblies yet to go, but, it's there in principle, right? You got the basic form laid out.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I mean, as an Imperial Knight player myself, in the broadest sense anyway, I mean, I'm not a regular Imperial Knight player, but I have an army of them. How does this heretical nonsense stand with you? Are you appalled to see such, treacherous behaviour from the noble Imperial Knights or Knight houses?
I actually really love it.
There you go.
It's good to see when Chaos gets some love, but it's also good that the Chaos can run them, and they don't just have to spend ages converting them. Because if you want to do a Chaos Knight before, you've got to spend an awful lot of time making it look good beyond the suggested conversion into Renegade kit, which was cut up the helmet a little bit and stick some spikes on. And it sort of gets a bit boring when you do come up against a knight. It is an Imperium knight the majority of the time, so hopefully we see a lot more Chaos players rocking them on the board. It gives us a sort of a new interesting challenge to play against, which I think will be interesting to see.
Because one of the knights has a right-handed gauntlet, and I don't think you can get a right-handed gauntlet for the Imperial Knights.
No.
You can now have a double-fisted knight.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what weapon options they can get, because with the Castellan, they could take effectively any of the weapons between the Castellan and the Valiant, which is sort of a bit of a shame that the Imperial players can't get that, but it'd be interesting to see what kind of combos the Chaos Knights can get if that's the same for effectively all of them.
Do we think it's going to be like a duplication of the Imperial Knight Codex in terms of stratagems and house traits, just sort of chaos-fied?
No, I doubt it. I imagine you're going to see a lot more kind of emphasis on, like leadership debuffs, probably more kind of aura effects around kind of buffs, but also more kind of killy aspects to it. I think these guys will be a lot more ferocious as a faction than the regular Imperial Knights. So my expectation would be that they probably have slightly less devastating firepower, but way more devastating combat potential. The thing that I'm hopeful that they address with these guys, and then hopefully then retrofit into Imperial Knights, is Devastating Reach. I think we really need to get to a place where Devastating Reach is not locked behind a stratagem, but is in fact just written into the rules for these guys, because it's so crazy that, you know, standing up on a box or standing up on a ruin completely and utter renders these guys pretty unuseful. So my sincere hope is that GW has taken on board some of the downsides of knights, especially now with quite an emphasis on new fancy knights, and actually thought about ways to make them effective in the way that you think they should be, in my opinion anyway. So yeah,
That'd be quite cool.
there you go. So yeah, no, Chaos Knights were cool to see, and they had a lot of Chaos Knights scattered around the hall for our viewing pleasure. They are absolutely gorgeous, it's fair to say. So yeah, really excited to see what Chaos Knights have. Do you think that all those people doing the diagrams about how terrible October was versus the ongoing Chaos list will have yet more to complain about?
For sure. That list is growing on a weekly basis.
Yeah, poor old October is seeming less and less impressive by the month, isn't it? It's
Dare I say that even Citadel Contrast was probably better than October.
Well, I mean, you know, they definitely had more build, I suppose. But then, you know, the thing we like to say, I mean, when we're talking about this stuff, is that, you know, we kind of spoiled October for ourselves by leaks going out into the world and that causing it to be spoilt somewhat, right? Is that not what they say?
Yeah, we do have to take that into account. It was a bit premature at the time, so...
Well, there we go. So, obviously, everything else that kind of came out of WarhammerFest was very much geared towards Games Workshop's various partners, as well as the other kind of specialist games ranges. So, the Horus Heresy, the Blood Bowl, Necromunda, lots and lots and lots of other stuff came.
Don't forget Imperial Aeronautica, which they haven't specifically said, but most likely will be in 40k setting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Very clearly in some sort of 40k setting, so certainly something that we'll talk about when we know more. But all we obviously saw was what everyone else saw, which was a bunch of images of nothing flying around and then shooting at nothing. So that was quite lovely. But we saw a nice logo, didn't we? So a lovely logo is no bad thing. They also had some new Adeptus Titanicus stuff. There is a gorgeous new Horus Heresy Imperial Knight with some absolutely massive guns. I had the privilege of talking to the man who designed this Imperial Knight, and I was like, what are these ridiculous massive guns? And he was sort of like, I don't know, but I imagine they would really, really, really hurt. And I was like, fair enough. Can't say fairer than that.
It's funny that you say you like it, but... because I absolutely hate it, and everyone I've spoken to absolutely hates it, because the arms are so ridiculously big. It doesn't look like it could physically carry them, and it just is it's a chunky knight. He's a chunky boy. I just don't like the proportions of it. And I know
love
a lot.
it, man. It reminds me of the mech from King of the Monsters. Do you ever remember King of the Monsters, the old SNK game?
No.
Really? Oh, man. So King of the Monsters was this really amazing SNK arcade game. So it was almost like a wrestling game, but it was all done with these like gigantic monsters. And there was this green robot character who, for the life of me, I can't remember the name of, but he had very similar kind of proportions. Or was he a yellow kind of robot? Regardless, he was like this kind of ape-like robot creature with big arms. And I was like, yeah, sort of reminds me of that. So yeah, for all those King of the Monsters 2 fans, this is a thing of beauty.
But what I did like was the armigers, which are the sort of
gorgeous
Mechanicum upgrade kits for the armigers, and there was I think 3 or 4 different variations, and they were saying how, because you'll notice that there's no hatches for the Knight Scions or the serfs, as they might be, to get in and out, and that's because they're Mechanicum. They said they most likely leave brains in jars inside.
Yeah. That's amazing. But yeah, no, I mean, outside of that, there was lots of really great stuff. I think, again, lots and lots of announcements about lots of things coming in the future. Potential for Necromunda to be getting their police force being introduced, the Arbites, Beaties, how would you pronounce that normally? Arbites, that'll do as well. That was the way I normally do it, but I feel like a lot of people have said it otherwise.
I think it is, most people say RBTs, like they say Custodes, it's sort of like accented. I don't know if that's correct, but I think it is.
So yeah, I mean, all in all, lots and lots of stuff, but not very much in the way of detail. And also, if I'm being completely brutally, overly scrutinizing of this whole thing, nothing truly incredible from a 40k perspective. I think a lot of us had gone into this event expecting for something really groundbreaking, either something like a 9th edition or the introduction of a new Primarch or something just absolutely monumental within the hobby, but obviously that did not come to pass. Inevitably, something along those lines will come very soon, but right now, this was a good selection of stuff, but definitely, and I think this speaks quite a lot to our spoilt nature as a fan base now. We were all probably expecting just a little bit more. I mean, don't get me wrong, if they had done this level of update 4 or 5 years ago, we would have all been utterly amazed. But, this is the problem with them doing such a consistent, fantastic job. We expect more. Gosh darn it.
We are spoiled now.
We are indeed. But rather than going through all the other things that they announced and talked about, why don't we take the time to tell people about the event and how we got on in it? So we arrived Sunday morn and were greeted on arrival into Coventry, or more specifically the Ricoh Arena, by a pretty reasonable queue, but not one that didn't move, appropriately fast. I think ultimately once you were in it, and we were pretty near the back, it all kind of resolved itself in a really clear, cohesive manner. They had people working the queue. They handed out your tickets in exchange for your tickets.
Swank bags as well.
Yeah, which was lovely.
Yeah.
I mean, again, nothing in there especially amazing, although to be fair, that Black Library pen was very much appreciated. Everyone loves a good old
quite
pen.
Nice. I'm also pictured on the front of the programme.
God, you had to get that in, didn't you?
I am.
I'm on the front of the program.
I'm famous.
Actually, the best thing out of that swag bag was the bag, like the tote bag that you got. That's the one thing I sort of kept.
Yeah.
All the badges and the effectively paraphernalia of leaflets just went in the bin when I got home.
The recycle bin, I hope.
Of course.
Well, good. Good behaviour.
Good. I just put mine back on the pile that we walked past.
Oh, see, that's pre-recycling. That's good foresight.
I kept the pen, though. The pen is amazing.
The pen is a winner. Well done, the pen.
Pen is a winner.
So apparently there were also some, because Sean joined us, who went on Saturday, so he could give us some insight. And he said everyone else on Saturday got a Warhammer Conquest pack of cards. We didn't get that in ours, so they presumably ran out, which is a little bit of a theme of the day when it came to trying to buy stuff as well.
Well, exactly. Going on Sunday is obviously a poorly thought out plan because they both run out of stuff, and the show finishes 2 hours earlier than it did on Saturday. So you get 2 hours less of show and lose out on the opportunity to buy things because they don't manage the flow of stock very well. So that was good of them. You would have thought that maybe they would have held stuff back for people who couldn't attend on the Saturday, but
You'd
no.
have thought, yeah.
Yeah,
But that's forward planning.
that is forward planning, I suppose. I mean, to be fair, there weren't very many in the way of show exclusives. You had the Primaris Lieutenant. Although, to be fair, is he a lieutenant or is he a captain?
No, he's a lieutenant. Yeah,
Well,
Lieutenant
You
Amalus.
say that, but he's very clearly got an iron halo, which, unless I'm being crazy, is only worn by captains.
Well, I'm literally looking at the program with my pretty picture on the cover, and it says Lieutenant Amalus.
I mean, I know it
unless
says
they're
that.
lying.
I know it says that, but again, as I say, I mean, lieutenants don't have iron halos, so unless he is a lieutenant with an iron halo, which is something that's entirely possible, I have to admit I didn't read the supporting documentation that came with him if he had his own rules that gave him an iron halo. But yeah, he's quite clearly modelled with an iron halo, and that was a reason why I assumed he might have been a captain that was accidentally labelled a lieutenant, because they're just in lieutenant labelling mode. But whatever. The point is he was the show exclusive, alongside the opportunity to buy objective markers, which are lovely. I managed to pick those up. I'm very happy with those. Some nice, metallic objective markers that are sprayed the colour gold for effect, I suppose. Or not sprayed so much, but...
Well, they're just bronze coloured, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. They're very obviously clearly not gold, but they look like gold, so that's something. Don't leave them out in the presence of magpies and so on and so forth. And then beyond that, there was the opportunity to purchase a dice tray, but they had all sold out the day before, so we were unable to buy a dice tray. But we were able to get Lieutenant What's-His-Face and some objective markers, which was all very lovely.
There was also some super heavy metal dice.
Oh yes, there was that as well.
It's weird because they didn't advertise that in the programme. You only spotted it when I went to buy the dice tray, and you would need the dice tray with them because they would literally destroy your models because they're quite heavy. But they did look really nice. I was quite tempted to pick one up, but because I didn't get a dice tray, I decided not to. And you could also buy all the Warhammer World exclusive models, which was like the HQ Command, like Land Raider and Rhino and some Horus Heresy models. But for us, because we go out to Warhammer World quite a few times a year, that wasn't particularly an exclusive.
Yeah, we're very spoilt like that, I suppose. And then, yeah, so, I mean, we arrived within the show. We immediately took it upon ourselves to get hold of tickets for the upcoming seminars. So the deal is that you go in and then you have to queue up again to get wristbands for the different seminars. So we decided to go to the Warhammer 40,000 Q&A, as well as a Horus Heresy reveal or seminar, if you will.
There was one on building war zones that was unfortunately cancelled. And that was the one that me and Sean were actually, out of the three, was looking forward to the most. So I thought that had been quite interesting.
So yeah, we went into the Warhammer 40,000 Q&A. What was your opinion of the Warhammer 40,000 Q&A, Tim?
Not a lot was revealed. It's kind of a lot of the questions were diverted to the other room. It was like, oh, you should ask the rules team. They're literally on the other side of that wall. Or ask the designers, for everybody that had a vaguely interesting question. So that was a bit annoying.
It became apparent quite early on, but not early enough, I would say, that it was clear that they weren't really able to talk about anything, which is only to be expected. But everyone's questions, mine included, were about, future events or upcoming changes or refinements to a rule set that ultimately the gentleman that was presenting, though head of the studio, isn't really directly responsible for. Alongside the release schedule and other things. So it was all like, when are you going to release Imperial Fists as a codex? And he's like, yes, maybe one day. And it was like that, just constantly.
Yeah, the problem with it is it was a Q&A that wasn't wrapped around any teasers or announcements, with the exception of the videos for the Apocalypse and the vehicles that we've already mentioned. And they didn't structure the Q&A to say, these are the kind of questions you should ask, or these are the kind of questions we can't answer, so please don't ask them. So the first 5 or 6 questions were people, like I said, asking those questions and him saying, in a polite way, either because it's about a future release and who knows, or it's to do with design or kind of rules question, in which case speaks to people next door. Yeah. So it wasn't too long before I was like, oh, this is going to be a waste of an hour.
Yeah. I mean, my question was essentially about the vehicle rules, or more specifically, are they going to seek to add some additional rules to the vehicle keyword? So at the moment, the vehicle keyword only effectively grants you negative properties. That is to say that it can't go through walls, can't interact with ruins, and a number of things will gain, or in some instances actually gain negatives from affecting vehicles. So if a poisoned weapon from a Drakari shoots at a vehicle, it will only wound it on 6s if it's got the vehicle keyword. But broadly speaking, the vehicle keyword doesn't grant any native abilities that would kind of seem appropriate for a vehicle. So I was asking that since they've added the airborne keyword, and obviously Psyker, character, and some other keywords grant actual in-game effects, would they seek to, add effects to the vehicle keyword so as they don't maybe get stuck in, not being able to shoot because a grot's managed to get up and touch its hull. And they obviously acknowledge that that is something that they're aware of, but ultimately that they weren't able to comment at that time. And to be honest with you, that's really what I should have expected. But as Phil correctly said, they didn't really lay out the parameters from the outset. And by the time I think everyone had sort of worked that out, the hour had pretty much concluded. And I think in the grand scheme of things, I think he answered maybe 3 questions out of I don't know how many that were actual answers, and not just speak to someone else or sounds great but I can't tell you anything else. So yeah, it was a bit of a waste of an hour, it has to be said. But is that their fault or is that ours? As a collective of people, who knows? But yeah.
Well, I sort of wish they would have, because on the Saturday there was a Warhammer preview seminar, and now that probably would have been just talking about Apocalypse and the Codex Imperial or Chaos Knights, for example. And it's like, I'd have much rather just sat in that and seen all of this stuff, even though they revealed it yesterday. But if they were going to talk about it in a bit more depth, that would have been a bit more interesting. But they just didn't really give you anything about what the future of 40k is going to look like. And that's, I think, why everyone went to that Q&A, hoping they would find out some information about it.
I think, again, it's reasonable to assume that you were going in there to get some insights, but at the same time, it wasn't surprising that you didn't get anything. But at the same time, can't seem to stop saying that word right now, but nonetheless, yeah, it was disappointing. But this is the thing, right? I mean, it's incredible to get that level of access and that level of opportunity to communicate with people that are integral to the growth and expansion of your hobby. And it's an amazing thing for these guys to take the time to come in and offer that kind of open forum to talk about anything. Yeah, sure, it could have been better organised, and, obviously we could have, me especially, given the fact that I did indeed ask a question, I could have asked a more appropriate question. But again, it's one of those things that, I just really wanted to sort of express my concerns or frustrations with certain things, such as the vehicle situation, that it kind of blindsided me to the format that we were in. Had maybe they just said, please just don't ask us about any of this stuff, just talk to us about the process of making 40k stuff, because ultimately that would have been probably more insightful. But there you go.
Well, the most interesting question was the guy that said, what is the most interesting play style for an army that you want, or what is the sort of a negative kind of play style that you try and avoid? And him answering that question which was I think probably the last question, was actually the most interesting one, because it was a bit more abstract and it was a bit more sort of top level, which is sort of something he could answer.
No, absolutely. And again, was he the right person to even be conducting that Q&A? I mean, obviously he is the studio head of 40k and so on, so obviously, yes, he is, but at the same time, apparently not, because he deferred a lot of those questions. But again, I mean, I want to be careful about how we address this stuff, because it's not to say that it was awful. It's just that thing where it's like, I expected more from it, or I expected there to be a bit more of a free-form discussion around what was happening, which is obviously a really optimistic perspective based on Games Workshop's heritage and so on. But nonetheless, I think again, it just was one of those things that kicking off the event, you just got in, you'd gone through the queue-in, you queued to get the seminar tickets. We picked up and bought some stuff pretty quickly, and then we're bundled into this Q&A, and it's like, right, okay, cool, this is going to be great, and you're sort of like, it's not really.
If they had had a rules writer and a miniature designer there as well, then it would have been a lot better, because most of those questions probably could have been answered. Although saying that, anything to do with a rules question or the future, like releases, they weren't ever going to answer, I don't think. Which is a bit odd, because actually the Horus Heresy seminar, which we went to later, they were a lot more open about.
I was going to say, how did it compare to the Horus Heresy one? Because I didn't actually attend that, but would you say the Horus Heresy one was better?
By a long way. So they talk about the new Horus Heresy book that's coming out. That showcased a whole bunch of miniatures to do with Dark Angels, especially, which looked really fantastic. And there was
gorgeous.
There were lots of oohs and ahs each time they revealed one, and then they revealed the Custodes' new flyer, and there was literally dead silence. As everyone was like,
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because when it did pop up and nobody cheered, it's like, surely they must take note of this, that custodes aren't really a welcomed thing in 30k or possibly even 40k.
I don't know if it was that, or if it's just very similar to the Orion ship that they've already got. It was a bit hard to tell the scale, if it was like a smaller fighter or if it's just as big as the Orion. Like, I couldn't quite tell. And so yeah, that one was very much a lukewarm reception of but everything else people seem to love, especially the Leviathan Dreadnought. That looks absolutely fantastic in Tempest Dreadnought. And then they went on.
Could it also be on the topic of the Custodes flyer that it was actually revealed the day before, though?
Maybe then, if that was the case.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. For me, it's just that the Custodes, and I've said this to you guys before, that if the Custodes were brought into the game in meta as like an assassin or just one sort of specialized heavy dude, then I wouldn't have a problem with it. But because you can make a whole army out of them, and the way they're depicted in the books, it kind of just breaks it in a way. They're supposed to be the elitist of the elite bodyguards of the Emperor, and suddenly you can have a whole army of them. It's a bit like...
There are thousands of them, like especially on Terra. So I don't know about... I mean, I don't play Horus Heresy, so I can't really comment on what people's reactions to them are. I do like them being in the game. I remember when they first came out for 40k, we were like, but they technically can't leave the Earth and leave Terra, so it's a bit odd. But then they explained that all the way once they finally released a couple of books and Gilliman came back.
Yeah, I don't mind having them in the game, but I'd rather it be just like one or two models, like characters or something, like an assassin is, instead of just like, here's like 3 units of them.
But you know that as soon as they started doing that, people would be crying out for an army of them, right? So you may as well you may as well just satisfy that demand. And, you know, again, ever since the Custodes were effectively released from their, bonds of whatever it was to essentially be mobilized, because, there's a really interesting series of books from Black Library that explore all that about, needing to effectively, mobilize the Custodes to assist in the mounting war and stuff, and the High Lords of Terror and all the politics that goes on behind the scene, because it's sort of like, we don't get to rewrite the rules because some dude wrote them 10,000 years ago kind of logic, where it's like, right, okay. But it's super interesting. The other thing that was also revealed during that earlier one was that was definitely worth a mention is some of those really amazing kind of neutral chaos demons. I don't know what everyone's opinions were on those, but I was really happy, mainly with the colour scheme, if I'm honest with you. I mean, it's a gorgeous kind of colour scheme that they've adopted with that, blacks and reds and so on. It just makes them look really awesome. But that's somewhat of a side note, because I don't want to go down the hole that is all the different things.
No, they explained that all in the what they are. They're sort of unmanifested demons that aren't aligned to any particular god at this time. They're sort of undivided, and they're very raw. So that's why they've got all the kind of claws and spiky bits, and they're not wearing any armor. So they're basically sort of fresh demons out the warp, it was interesting to hear about that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, it's
So,
pretty cool. And then they talk a bit more about the book 9 and sort of the future of other books. And they sort of said, the rough timeline is you won't be waiting as there won't be as, because it was like a 2-year wait basically between the last book and this one. And they said the next one won't be anywhere near as bad. And they sort of explain what's going to be in the next one and the kind of rules that you'll see. So they're very open about sort of the future of the game, which is the exact opposite of 40k, where it's all very tight-lipped and they only announce literally what's going to be on pre-order in a few weeks' time, which is, Chaos Knights.
Now, I can understand how that would be, the case, though, isn't it? Because Forge World have always kind of fostered this really open dialogue around their game systems and trying to kind of be of the community. And I know, obviously, now with Warhammer Community, the broader kind of Citadel Games Workshop projects and products, are more accessible than they ever have been, but there's still an inbuilt level of secretism, whatever the words are, around these things. Whereas the Horus Heresy definitely feels a lot more collaborative and a lot more open, which is amazing. And I do really like some of these Dark Angel models that they've revealed. I think the Terminator Captain is utterly gorgeous. I'm not too keen on the man with the shield, but maybe that's something to do with how they've kind of painted his face in this side of things. He's got quite a weird sort of dinky face that I'm not really super into. But the 2 Dreadnoughts are also absolutely gorgeous. So, in a way, sad that I missed it, but at the same time, not, because I got to go around and experience more of the show. And I guess, given the fact that we've talked for quite a while now on the topic of WarhammerFest, we probably should try and wrap up and kind of talk about specific things about it that we enjoyed. So if I can trouble you to pick your favourite thing from WarhammerFest, what would that be, Phil?
That's a tricky one. I think the bit I enjoyed the most, but also the thing I got to do the least, was actually go around and speak to the sort of design studio and the sort of staff members in general. We got me and Sean had a good chat with John Bracken, who is now ironically in the 40k team, but he's actually not. He does Shadespire. It's him and a couple of other people. Basically straddle the AOS and Warhammer 40k departments and form their own like little mini boxed game department that is still separate from the actual box game department. So it was good to go around and chat to a lot of the miniature designers. The one question I did want to ask at the Q&A, which I didn't, I got to ask to a couple of people, which was really interesting. It was basically to ask them what's happening with Forge World units, because they've effectively announced that the studio team is now split up to a dedicated 40k team and a AOS team for the rules writing. And then I spoke to the Forge World guys and said, so who deals with the Forge World 40k rules for Krieg, for example? Not that I've got a vested interest.
No, not at all.
No, I didn't mention them, but I was just sort of asking in a vague general way. And he goes, oh, none of us do that anymore. It's now the 40k rules team department, so they deal with it. And then I went over and I met you were chatting to one of the guys, and I asked him the same question, and he basically said that he's been working in that department for 6 months, and I'm pretty sure he used to do the events team because we've seen a couple of events before. And he was like, so he joined 6 months ago, which is when the departments had their big reshuffle, where 40k became a dedicated 40k team. And that's when apparently they took on the Forge World rules as well. And then when we sort of asked him about what that might mean, he was obviously a bit tight-lipped and didn't really say. He just said, don't expect a bunch of Imperial Armour books to suddenly drop. My implication from that was that they won't do Imperial Armour books in the future, but maybe he just meant if there are coming, they won't be anytime soon.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all obviously a bit vague. And I guess if they only had the Forge World units in their grasp for 6 months, that's not enough time to write a book using them, because obviously the lead time is probably a year for this kind of thing. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with it in the future. But it just feels like there'd be probably a long gap between before that actually happens.
There was a remarkable amount of people that I spoke to who had only just started in October. Actually, October seemed to be like a big month for recruitment in Games Workshop. Lots and lots and lots of people. I mean, I say lots of people, but a good proportion of people I spoke to are like, "Oh yeah, I've been doing it for the last 6 months." So like one of the background writers, "Oh yeah, I've been there since October," and I was like, "Oh okay, cool. So what you worked on?" And he's like, "Well, obviously I can't say." It's like, "Oh yeah, obviously." So it was a really weird conversation a lot of the time where you're like, "What have you been up to?" Or "What have you done?" Stuff, but you'll see it in a year. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but getting to chat to those guys, even though quite often they're like, "Oh, here's the one model that I've worked on that I'm allowed to show you. The rest you'll have to wait." Even so, that's still by far the best bit. And if I honestly felt like I didn't have enough time to do that because I did the 2 seminars. We obviously went out for lunch, which probably took a fair bit of time, and then I entered some models into Golden Demon. Which took a fair bit of time, like just queuing up to do, and then also collecting my model at the end. So I only felt like I had like 2 hours going around the actual hall, which was still far better than previous years where we were gaming, where I'd have maybe half an hour tops or an hour to rush around everything. But I actually felt like I didn't really see much or anywhere near as much as I'd have liked. So in future, I'd probably do less seminars or do it over 2 days, or maybe just structure my time a bit better to focus on certain things.
No, that's fair enough. I think, again, I mean, off the back of the first seminar, definitely decided to prioritise going around and talking to people. So I had a lot of conversations with designers, game designers, background writers, graphic designers, all that sort of fun stuff. So again, it was really interesting going around and talking to different people about the different things they do, and that's definitely a big highlight of the event. I think, again, one of the interesting things that we have now with Warhammer Community and all the elements that they bring to life through their podcasts and other things is we have a ridiculous amount of content out there anyway that kind of furnishes us with a lot of this information, but a lot of it's always done through the filter of kind of Warhammer Community and the broader sort of sales pitch that they're putting across. So it's really nice to actually sort of sit down and see some of the personality come through and actually talk to them in a much more kind of raw and unfiltered manner. So I was hugely in favour of that. That was definitely a big plus for me, for sure. What was your highlight, Tim? What did you enjoy?
I would say for me, not only the Chaos Knight reveal and talking to the designers and stuff, but it has to be the Golden Demon cabinets. I just love seeing like what people can produce in the hobby, and there was just some amazing entries, and also seeing like the Instagram painters I follow and seeing their work on display like in first hand instead of just on pictures is always a nice warm feeling.
Because I was there with you for a bit, did you get to look around the whole cabinets? Because I had a look at some of them and it was just such a crush of people. I sort of gave up and then went off, and then when I came back to pick up my model at the end, half of there was barely anything left, so I'd sort of should have probably come back a bit earlier.
Yeah, it was difficult. I sort of tackled it in 2 stages, and I omitted the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings stuff. So I didn't check out all the cabinets, but I did get the ones I cared about. So yeah, it was just the dioramas and the jewels. They're always something that I hold dear to my heart.
Mm.
I mean, what is the solution to that, though? Because, I mean, as long as I've been going to Games Days and WarhammerFests, this has been a consistent issue. The viewing Golden Demon is a real struggle, and it's not an enjoyable experience because of it. Like, I love what these guys are doing and what they're creating, but I despise having to go and look at it in that setting. Is there anything you think that could have helped make that a more enjoyable experience?
I would spread it out over a bigger space. So, for example, the first floor was all contrast paint, which is quite a large section just to dedicate it to new range. And I get that they're trying to push it, but personally, I would have that floor just dedicated to Golden Demon, have loads of cabinets, and then a lot of the models aren't sort of squashed in together. For example, my model, obviously it wasn't going to win anything, but it was literally right at the bottom, tucked at the back, underneath 2 models that had large diorama bases on, so there was literally no
Wow.
light on my model.
Did they have large diorama bases or more kind of rustic, chopping board bases is what I kind of
effectively, yeah, like a chopping board sort of sized base that has sort of mud and grass and stuff added onto it. So
I think you're doing them a service to say they had that. All I remember seeing was just literally like a chopping board. I was going to say to you, actually, I completely forgot to mention it, but I was like, Phil, you definitely need to just put your tank on a chopping board. That seems to be the thing that everyone's doing.
Well, ironically, last year I put my halflings on an actual chopping board, but like deliberately so, in keeping with the theme of the halfling Blood Bowl 2 incident. But yeah, I realised my model needs work in terms of like everything I do needs to go on sort of a fancy diorama base of some kind if you're going to enter into Golden Demon. But the problem I was trying to point out was because of that, my model was like plunged in darkness, and it was a very dark tank in terms of my colour scheme anyway, so it didn't do it any favours sort of where it was positioned. And if they had actually had twice as many cabinets, it would have been better. I saw Darren, I think his name is one of the judges, and he was saying by Saturday they had already had twice as many entrants this year as they had last year. So I think they were sort of overwhelmed with the number of Golden Demon entries.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think that's the thing, though, isn't it? It's like, how do you get to a place where you can produce a better experience? And I think ultimately that's something that, I think a lot of events need to take into account and work out how to do, because when you're creating an event, you want to consider the flow of people and how these things work. And, essentially the Golden Demon display is a, square that is positioned in a section of a hall that essentially means that you're mostly got your back to a wall, which again really kind of closes in the space, because then you find yourself, it's very difficult to navigate into it, and then it's quite difficult to navigate its way out of it. And then they've also kind of got this weird choke point where their entrance point to the actual display was towards what I would call the back of this square. So there was an opening for staff to obviously take in the models and position them, bring them in and bring them out. And there was a large kind of congregation there quite consistently, with people certainly towards the end where people started taking models away. And I felt like that also didn't really help. So I think if it were up to me, I just think it just needs people. It just needs management. It just needs them to actually be like, right, we need like 5 or 6 people whose job it is all weekend to manage the flow of this, and actually have it on a kind of ticker system where it's like, cool, next 5 people go through. And
at the very least, you need going in like a clockwise direction, for example, because half the problem is half the people are going in one direction, the other half are going in the other direction, and then you sort of unfortunately get people that just seem to not be moving at all for a long time. And it's like, I get that you're trying to appreciate the models, but at the same time a load of people are just unable to see anything because these people are there.
You need that mini golf style system where it's like, people are backing up behind you. Come on now, you gotta play through, or whatever it is. You gotta get out of the way. But yeah, I just think it needs some management for sure. And then, on my side of things, in terms of what I really liked about it, I mean, most of it's been covered off by you guys. I think, talking to the staff is really great. The announces are always super fun, and obviously seeing all the Golden Demon stuff's really cool. The things I think it's lacking, I think participation gaming is really, really low within that event. In fact, it wasn't really available anywhere, which, again, I accept is not something that they're necessarily looking for overall, but I'm always really surprised that there's no kind of like big games or big spectacles. There were, to the best of my knowledge, no new dioramas or new things on display. Again, I remember the glory years of old games days where you'd turn up and they revealed like the Gates of Terror, and this was back in like the late 90s, and they had all these beautiful customized converted models, and this large gigantic warlord titan that they had crafted, and all this really amazing stuff that made like a really amazing spectacle out of the whole experience. None of that was really present. There's lots of good reasons to go to Warhammer Fest, and it's definitely a great show. The other thing as well that I really sort of struggle with is the kind of partners area. So the largest chunk of the hall is dedicated to Games Workshop partners and Games Workshop retail. So you essentially have a large retail store, which is obviously great because they're selling stuff that you may not be able to get elsewhere, such as the Forge World range and so on and so forth. But, all the partner stuff is a bit bizarre to me because, as much as I obviously love a lot of the partner products that are available, it's one of those things that, I'm there because I'm a big fan of Warhammer 40,000 or Games Workshop as a hobby. And the core of that hobby is the modelling and the spectacle of the game of tabletop wargaming. I like all the card games and all the other elements, but it's not really what I'm there for. So for them to dedicate so much space to their video games and their card games and their, whatever other things they had going on in that space, their apparel and all this sort of stuff, I'm just a bit like, I'm not really bothered about that, and I'm not really there for that reason. I'm sure lots of people got a lot out of it, and the idea is obviously for Games Workshop partners that they've got a captive audience of Games Workshop fans, so it's a great opportunity to sell them on the virtues of, Age of Sigmar champions or whatever. But really for me it's, I'm there because I'm a tabletop wargamer. I'm big into that, and I'd like to see more of that, because if I'm honest, when you walk into that hall, it just sort of feels like it's a Games Workshop partner event with a bit of studio kind of access, which doesn't necessarily feel like as big a celebration of Warhammer. It feels like it feels like a trade show for Warhammer partners. And I would prefer it if they maybe readdress the balance and put us in a situation where you walk in and you're blown away by some incredible installation, and there's participation games and things happening that are much more celebration of the game that you're there celebrating collectively, I suppose. So that was my only real thing, is like, maybe a bit too much emphasis on partners. Seminars weren't super great, but that's based on one in particular. I think broadly they seemed like they had a lot of value for a lot of different reasons, and Golden Demon's great, but it's a real struggle to see what you want to see, and access to the studio is probably the best part of it, I would say. So there you go. Overall though, don't get me wrong, I'll be going back again next year. I'm a Warhammer mark. I love me my Warhammer. So be sure to come over and say hello at Warhammer Fest 2020, because I'm definitely going to be there. Phil, will you go again?
Yeah, for sure. I will. Even though I was like, it wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be, I will still go back next year, because I think it is still... a lot of the things we're complaining about are more nitpicks than anything else. It could have been an awful lot worse. I did speak to a few people and they were like, oh, this is the worst in years. But then maybe they're wanting something specific out of it, like sort of new releases or event exclusive models, which, as we've already mentioned, there wasn't really. I think they just need to get better at teasing, or not teasing. They teased too much and they didn't give us enough of a preview of upcoming stuff for 40k or the future of 40k, which I think is what we were all hoping for.
Tim, will you be coming again next year?
Yeah, I'll be coming again next year. Like, I know at the time I was a bit disheartened, as Phil said, there was quite a lot of teasing, and I just felt like they didn't deliver on it. And you also mentioned not being able to play the new systems that they've been going on about. But it's a jolly day out, really, isn't it? You get to talk to like-minded people, get to see some awesome painted models. So, yeah.
Exactly. At the end of the day, we're all a bunch of Warhammer fanboys, so it is only inevitable that we are going to love it. But I think the thing is that, just because that is a fact, it shouldn't be the default that we are just happy to be there. I think, again, there's just little attention to detail things, and I think a few little quality of life things. Games Workshop has no longer got the excuse of being this dinky little business that can, hide behind its relative size. It's performing exceptionally well. It's got, money that it can invest in its, experiences for its fans. And I think it would be great to see the effects of that. And, I think, again, this to me, there just wasn't one thing that really stood out to me this year. And I think that's a real shame. And I think, ultimately, when I think back, and again, this may be rose-tinted glasses to a certain extent, but when I think back to almost every games day I went to, with maybe the exception being the one I went to in 2009, 2010, I think it was. There was nothing here that stood out, but the old games days, there was always something remarkable about them. There was always something really cool going on, or they were either early access to kits that were coming out in 3 months' time, or something significant was always there at Games Day. Whereas WarhammerFest, having been to, I believe we've been to every WarhammerFest. At least
done 3 now. I don't know if there was. I presume there was some before, but
there could have been one before, yeah. But we've been to the last 3, and I'd say, again, the last 2 we went to had gaming events going on that we were involved in, so it's difficult to directly compare. But last year definitely felt a bit more substantial than this year, I would say. This one just... But anyway, there you go.
I guess this is also the first one where there's no new edition of a game coming out. So last year was Age of Sigmar 2, right?
Yeah,
and then
true,
before was 8th edition, and they previewed that and we got to play it. And then this year, there's not really anything. There's, like I said, it's expansions for stuff or new games that might be coming out, but they haven't told us anything about them.
Yeah.
Like Warcry was the one thing I was really looking forward to seeing or getting to play or learning something about, and they just previewed a new warband, and that was it. So that was for me the sort of a big disappointment of what I was hoping for versus what I got out of it.
So there you go. All right, well, that pretty much wraps up our chat about WarhammerFest. If you would like to attend WarhammerFest in the future, I imagine you'll find details about it and other things on Warhammer Community, so continue to look at them. I understand that there will be more of those events taking place around the world. I think they do one in Germany, and I believe they're doing one in North America as well. Again, the broad consensus was that this one didn't quite meet our expectations, but we're still a big fan of the concept and hope that they just continue to improve. So, yeah, that is WarhammerFest as far as we can tell. Shall we move on now with the tradition that is a transition? Can't even say it anymore. Transitional noise. So now, within this segment of the podcast, first and foremost, we're joined by Joe again. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
Hello. It's me, Joe.
You're not going to mention the pants thing?
What, you mean the thing that no one else will have heard because it would have been edited at the point where Phil was saying that stuff before?
That's true.
You've just incriminated yourself.
We'll just breeze past it. We'll just pretend that it never happened.
Can you breeze past it, Joe?
Hopefully.
For breeze past it, perchance.
Yes. Hush, hush now.
Hush, hush now. Shush, shush, shush. But anyway, Joe's back with us. He wasn't here when we talked about WarhammerFest because he, for whatever reason, was too busy to come and talk to us. Plus, he didn't actually go to WarhammerFest. This whole thing, as far as I can remember, was discussed in the whole thing about WarhammerFest, so we won't worry about that. But, obviously, in addition to Joe, there's good old Phil. How you doing, Phil?
I'm good, thank you.
Lovely. There we go. So, in this segment of the podcast, we went to WarhammerFest, as is evident from us having talked about it in the previous section. But one of the things that was super interesting about WarhammerFest was not just the fact that we got to access all the dev studio stuff and talk to different people, and all of that stuff was super fun, although, if I recall, we didn't necessarily say it was the best it could have been, but it was, good overall. The really interesting for us was, obviously, the announce of the Chaos Knights, and something one of the developers or studio people said in their Q&A, which was that essentially they got a question or a remark made to them once, which was, now that you've made all the codexes, what are you going to do next? And to which they responded, I didn't realise we'd done all the codexes. Obviously then implying Chaos Knights is the first of a new wave of incredible new things that we can expect to see in the wondrous world of Warhammer 40,000. And to be honest with you, that obviously is no surprise at all, because in the span of what has been 2019, we've had the announcement of Chaos Knights, we've had the addition of the Demonkin, the, what are they actually called? The Primaris and Phobos armor stuff, Vanguards, blah, whatever they are. What was that called, Joe? You're the sort of man who remembers.
They were Vanguard. They were just Vanguard.
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 Vanguard. And we obviously had the Gene Stealer Cult stuff, although that was towards the end of last edition, of 2018, or did that happen early 2019? The Gene Stealer Cult.
Well, the Codex came out this time, but there was a Codex in the previous edition as well.
Oh no, I know, but the new Gene Stealer Cult stuff came out earlier this year, didn't it?
It was, I think it was either end of December. It probably was early Jan, actually.
Yeah. It's been a manic year already, but the point is that we've seen now that Games Workshop are to a certain extent opening the floodgates and starting to explore the wider realm of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. We're seeing this really interestingly with games like Rogue Trader, and also Blackstone Fortress, because obviously we're now starting to see all sorts of random assorted models coming into existence that probably wouldn't have necessarily had a place within an army, but as individual models can have a place, and obviously Blackstone Fortress seems to facilitate those really nicely, so we're seeing all sorts of new wonderful things. But I guess what we're going to talk about is what we imagine we might see in the remainder of 2019 and then 2020, obviously accepting that we know that Sisters of Battle are on the horizon. So let's start off with good old Joe, seeing as he wasn't present in the last one. What are you hoping to see in the rest of the year?
I'm going to go down the route that everyone else is saying, and it'll be a second goody Primarch. A goody two-shoes Primarch. A goody
two-shoes Primarch. Which of the goodies two-shoes Primarch do you think that they're going to?
Well, it's a coin cost, isn't it, between the Lion or
the Lion L. Johnson.
Lion L. Johnson, or what's his name? The
Khan.
Lehman Russ.
That's the one, Lehman Russ.
You think so? More than Dawn, more than Vulcan, more than other names?
Well, Games Workshop announced when they released Vigilus Ablaze that they're going to be revisiting the older campaigns, obviously, that were happening at the time,
like Armageddon and stuff.
When the Great Rift happened. So obviously, when the Great Rift happened, Fenris was set on fire by the Thousand Suns, and then obviously the Dark Angels turned up and took a pop at him and blew up a couple moons on the way.
That's true. Cypher was not Cypher. What was his name?
The Changeling, wasn't it, running around?
No, but wasn't there a Dark Angel that they used to keep in a vault somewhere that got taken away? Luther, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're looking at basically one of those Primarchs turning up, I'd say.
So you reckon it's either Lionel Johnson or Lehman Russ?
Yeah, because Magnus is still part of that campaign, that ongoing campaign. So they need a counterpart to him.
Well,
it was funny because in that Q&A that we went to, someone did ask, will there be any more Primarchs? And the guy who was obviously the head of the 40k team sort of jokingly said, well, they're all dead, aren't they? Or the majority of them are. So, yeah, I don't know. I'd be not upset, but I'd be quite surprised if actually we do see one this year. So I think the Primarchs are so rare.
It's interesting, though, because obviously, much like with the Chaos Space Marine book, they're in a situation now where it's quite clear that they need to address and potentially release a new Space Marine book. So the interesting thing about that, I suppose, is that the Primarch wouldn't necessarily be, or it would seem more logical potentially if the Primarch was either the Imperial Fist, so Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists, or Khan of the Khan Jagatar Khan of the White Scars, or Corax of the what are they called now? Raven Guard, something like that. It's like, I don't know, because it seems logical that they're going to be releasing another Space Marine book, and because they're releasing another Space Marine book, would they not necessarily think it's worthwhile to put that in there? But then also, will this Space Marine book kind of also act as a supplement to the Dark Angel book, the Blood Angel book, and the Space Wolf book? I guess, I don't know. It's an interesting quandary in terms of how that would even work, because obviously they've added so many new Phobos armor suits, and they've obviously revealed that new grav tank that they've got. They've also shown off the Iron Hands, Iron Father character that's in the background. So yeah, who knows?
In the chat, the Voxcast that Games Workshop do with Jarvis Johnson, he said that these new Phobos Marines are the spear tip of a new set. So there's other versions of Phobos armor coming out, as well as new versions of Aggressor armor coming out.
So do you reckon a Phobos armored Primarch? Is that what you're saying?
Potentially. So
who would be?
It would be Corax. Corax would be the main contender for the Phobos armor.
What happened to him in the end? I mean, spoilers and so on.
He ran off into the Eye of Terror to kill all of his...
Yeah, that was it. Didn't he have a fight against someone in the Eye of Terror as well, where he became some kind of, like, flaming hawk monster or something?
I don't know.
I think there was a thing about that where because I think it was something about how Primarchs are of the warp, and he is now realised his potential, and it's something. I mean, admittedly, this is real piecemeal because I just pick up loads and loads of weird Horus Heresy stuff through YouTube videos by other people who've read much more than me. So maybe I shouldn't just be throwing out remarks like that without any form of reference. But I think he came up against Lugar. Lorgar. See, that was the version of the events I couldn't find. And they had a bit of a scuffle, and he went all mad, kind of psychic crazy on him or something. But I don't know, maybe I'm just making that up. Or someone else was making it up, and I was foolish enough to believe them. But, I mean, he'd be a cool one to see come back, though, right? That would be wicked. Like, to have a, jump pack madman Primarch would be pretty cool.
It certainly changed the game for Space Marines, having a Primarch that could potentially move like 12 inches a turn.
Well, probably even more than that, surely.
Yeah. And he'd be more combat orientated than Gilliman. Because Gilliman's more of a sit back with a gun line and go out when someone gets too close. Whereas Corax's whole job would literally just be torpedo in and cut people up.
I suppose the only thing is interesting as well, when you consider the landscape of the 40k universe, right? Roberto Gilliman, Bobby G, he's now your kind of main Primarch who's taken on this kind of, almost Emperor-like role. Would bringing someone like Corax back not be that interesting, because ultimately he would just sort of fall in line and just be this assassin character trying to go after all these kind of Chaos Lords and other things. I think actually bringing back a character like Lionel Johnson probably is the most interesting, because there's always been this inbuilt kind of competition between Lionel Johnson and Roberto Gilliman, or more specifically, like Roberto Gilliman's always looked at Lionel Johnson with a certain level of respect and so on, because he was the firstborn son and all of this kind of inbuilt jealousy that comes along with that. Again, I think it was in one of the Horus Heresy books, I can't remember which, where Lionel Johnson and Gilliman meet on Ultramar, and Lionel Johnson comes in, and Gilliman's like, "Oh, he's showing off. Oh, he's showing off. Oh, and he stopped showing off." And then, so it's like a really interesting kind of relationship between those two, because obviously Lionel Johnson's like, "I'm the first," and obviously he's going to come back and be like, "Yeah, well, I'm Lord Commander now, so you gotta get used to that." And it's gonna be, I think that could be a more interesting narrative for sure.
Well, I
Yeah.
think having a character that's going to almost be at odds or have some kind of conflict with Gilliman would make for a more interesting story, even if he does relatively fall in line in terms of the I'm going to still follow what Gilliman's going to do, or as part of the Imperium. But just to have a Primarch that isn't really going to stand on his own or do much. I mean, it's got to be somebody really important. I always like the idea of the sort of dark wolves, in terms of there was a leak ages ago that was probably a photoshopped lie, that was Lehman Russ coming back from the warp, and he's all tainted, so he's like a dark variant of himself. So he's chaos tainted, but not necessarily chaotic, but not loyal at the same time. And it could potentially be a whole sub-faction of space wolves that are a bit like the Fallen, I guess, that can toe that line between being used by Chaos or potentially being used by Imperium. I always thought that was a neat idea.
Yeah, and I'm not against that. I think as well, obviously, there's that whole kind of narrative around Logan Grimnar having potentially been tainted by Chaos as well. That could be an interesting angle that they could take Space Wolves in also. So yeah, I mean, I like the idea of Russ coming back. I like the idea of Lionel Johnson coming back. Obviously, I'm not super keen on Sanguinius coming back, but it would be hilarious if they did that for some absolutely absurd series of reasons. But maybe Belisarius Cool made a new one. Who could say? But yeah, no, I think I mean, I agree with Joe. I think the most likely outcome is you're going to see probably either Russ or Lionel Johnson, or potentially, I don't know. I mean, could it be that Dawn, old Rogel Dawn? What do you reckon, Joe? Any chance of him coming back?
I don't know. I don't know where Dawn is at the moment. I think, isn't he off being sad somewhere?
Yeah,
because he's
something
all
along those
like,
lines.
I failed the Emperor. Not his favourite anymore.
If only I put one more layer on that wall, it would have stood. Dang it! He just,
Right.
it's an interesting one for sure. I mean, it's logical to assume that before the year is over, we will see a new Primarch of some form. In a weird way, I almost like the idea of them doing another Chaos one, just really stacking the odds against Gilliman. Because then maybe it makes the triumphant return of whoever it ends up being feel a little bit more substantial, I suppose. Maybe someone like Gilliman is backed into a corner and it's all going very wrong, and then out of nowhere it's Vulcan. Wonderful. I don't know.
Because the thing with the Chaos Primarchs is they exist and they're out there doing stuff. Like Fulgrim is in the lore that he's in the warp, or he's attacking places or seen around the Imperium. Whereas with all the Primarchs, like the loyal Primarchs, it feels like you've got to write, not necessarily like a MacGuffin, but you've got to write some kind of story or an excuse to bring them back. It sort of feels like the whole point about the Loyalists is they're not meant to come back. They are just meant to be like a set piece or a bit of a background. Like they're meant to be there but not there. Whereas the Chaos ones are meant to be the ones that are active and actually doing things. And you've got to really come up with a decent story reason to bring back any of the Loyalists, because none of them are legitimately alive and doing stuff, as far as I'm aware, right?
Lionel Johnson is in the lore legitimately alive, just not doing stuff. So,
but isn't he in stasis or something?
No. So, if he was, he's healed now. So in the latest Dark Angel Codex, it referenced that his wounds are now all healed. So he is literally healthy and ready to go. He just isn't yet.
But he's in a box of some kind. He's not
the Watchers in the dark are, waddling around him or something and patting him on the head or so on. I don't know. It's a strange old thing, the Dark Angels. But yeah, it's logical to assume that Lionel will come back. The thing that I'm really interested in, I suppose this is a question for Joe, if you were to bring back, and we'll use Lionel Johnson as an example, what would you give him to make him different from Gilliman?
Lionel Johnson.
Yeah. Like in the rules, I mean, like in the game, what would... Because this is a really interesting thing to me with this new system, and I think we've had this conversation before, because everything in the game that's a character is a ballistic skill 2+, a weapon skill 2+. You know, it's a strength of something between 6 and 8, and then it's a toughness of between something of 6 and 8, and then it'll have 9 wounds, and da-da-da-da-da. You know, there's very few things you can do in 8th edition to define the nuanced differences between characters, other than obviously the abilities and the weapons they carry. So, I mean, what would you expect to see for him?
Weapons-wise, Cypher's gonna give him back his sword, I would imagine, because Cypher's running around with his sword, isn't he?
That's what they say. Heavily rumoured.
Heavily rumoured. So he's gonna get his sword back. And it's going to be something ridiculous, like ×2 strength, -4, like either 3 damage or D6 damage. He'll have something like 6 attacks, I imagine. I don't know. And a sweep. Does Gilliman have a sweep attack?
No, Gilliman's stuff is that obviously he reroll hits, reroll wounds because he's a Primarch. I imagine they'll keep that the same for Lionel Johnson. He has, and then everything else he does is like, it's a round of it. So like his Warlord trait is +1 leadership, and that's the chapter tactic. But he gets like to roll to gain command points. He gives an additional 3 command points, and he, his thing is that he doesn't die because he has the whole getting back up from being dead thing.
The Lion's whole shtick is that he's like a questoral knight, like a knight of the inner circle. So he's going to be an absolute combat monster, and you'd kind of hope that he could go toe to toe with something like a knight.
Yeah.
Like he'll give the re-roll bubble the same as Gilliman, I would imagine. I don't know, but I think that's the problem that Games Workshop face when it comes to Primarchs, is like, how do you make them all different? Well,
in the case of the Chaos ones, it's relatively easy to do because they're all these gigantic hulking monsters, and obviously there's a great degree of difference between a Magnus and a Mortarion. In the case of these guys, I'm really interested to see how they do that. I think, again, it's going to come down to some of those special rules, right? So, again, it's like, like something to do with his duelist pride or whatever it is, or, the honour of the knight or the lion's rage and all these other kind of potential variables. I think as well, do you think he'll take the lion helm off of Azrael? He'll put that on and generate the 4+ invuln all the time.
That's a potential.
He'll put the helmet on, and then Azrael. If you take Azrael in an army with Lionel Johnson, he can't have it. He costs 50 points less, but doesn't have his helmet bearer.
I imagine he'll give something to do with the stubbornness. So it'd be like an army-wide, ignore leaderships or something like that. Or like the most that can run away is one person.
Yeah. I mean, they've already got that.
Yeah, so that would just become you're immune to morale.
Yeah. So you don't take morale tests with Lionel Johnson in the army, I guess. That's the thing. That's the stuff that I think is interesting, I suppose. Because the thing is depending on what they give him, because he's not necessarily going to be loaded up with guns and all the other sort of stuff. That kind of Hand of Dominion look that Gilliman has with the heavy bolter thing is not something that you're going to necessarily associate with Lionel Johnson. So it's going to be interesting just to see how he
maybe some kind of feel no pain, or like he'll reduce his opponent's attacks. Remember, like how Custodes used to be with Guardian Spears.
Yeah. That'd be good to see if he could reduce the number of attacks that his opponent has, or like cut them in half or something. Would be quite interesting. Also, as well, potentially if he had like an invuln save that only worked in combat, but every time it's a parry or something, and then it hits them back with it. So it's literally a case of like, if you pass this save, I can't remember what it's called in like fencing when you parry and then hit them back. It's like a fancy terminology, but yeah, some sort of thing where it's like, you know, you get one hit back on them, so you get to roll to wound them for every save you get or something. Again, it's an interesting conundrum, and I mean, obviously that's for the rules writers to determine. But that's the thing I always thought in Horus Heresy that was interesting, because, you know, you could be like, well, you know, you could be like, Lionel Johnson's got weapon skill 10, whereas Agron's got weapon skill 8, but he's got more attacks and higher strength. And you know what I mean? It's like the old 40k system had a finesse to it that you could actually communicate these differences between characters, whereas I feel like in 8th edition it's a bit more rudimentary in its approach. But there you go. What would you give Lionel Johnson, Phil?
What, in terms of special rules?
Yeah, what would you give him?
You know what? I don't know, actually. I don't know enough about who he was.
Fair enough. He should make Krieg better. That's what you want. He should have an affinity for Krieg, and all Krieg get 6 extra wounds, and their lasguns are made of lava, and they fire lava. Like, they all get volcano cannons. Would that be good?
I'm sure it would be.
Yeah, for no extra points. Multiplies and amplifies your Krieg.
Why not?
But on the topic of Krieg, or not specifically Krieg, just more, I'm talking to Phil. What do you reckon, or what would you like to see them do now, Phil, that the floodgates are open? What could happen, you believe?
Well, I think they've sort of already said, and as Joe sort of mentioned briefly, I think we'll see more campaign books as well. And I think that will be a lot of the times like their gateway for new rules, or for putting rules for new miniatures. So we might not see a brand new codex, but we might see a bunch of new campaign books which have new rules for armies that have pre-existing codexes already. So one of them might be some more Imperial Guard models. So this could be anything from something like the Krieg and Elysians from Forge World coming over to the Games Workshop sort of family, and getting either standalone books, or maybe just coming out via a campaign book, or potentially more unique models for regiments. I think some of the kits are quite dated, but not as dated in terms of, you know, you look at the Elder range where the majority of it is fine cast, so all of the majority of the Imperial Guard stuff is all plastic. It's just not very good plastic. So even the Lehman Russ kit is pretty dated. All the Cadian units are pretty dated, and it'd be nice to see some. You could do a few good multi-part kits with interchangeable heads, using the same base models. Because, for example, like the Morgian and the Iron Guard, and even to an extent like Steel Legion, they all have a very similar kind of tunic, sort of smart military dress code uniform, and they just have different heads and a different coloured coat, which is just a different paint job. So you could it'd be nice to see them do multi-part kits, which will allow you to create a bunch of different regiment-specific models, because that's the thing that really differentiates. Like Space Marines, for the most part, are just a paint scheme. Yeah, you do have some unique units within them, but for Imperial Guard, every regiment has a distinct look. It's not just painting my Cadians blue versus green to represent Catachans. It's like Catachans have a model range, and Talon used to have a model range. So it'd be nice to bring some of those old like metal regiments back. I'm not sure they necessarily would, but that would be really nice if they did.
I mean, it's a hell of a job, though, isn't it? I mean, if they could come up with, like you say, if they could come up with a acceptable base plate, as it were, that you could start adding things to, I think that would work really well. It's just the difficulty of just how much versatility there is in that range in terms of the Talan Desert Raiders and the what's the name of the snow ones? The
Valhalla.
Valhalla, yeah, those guys, and then you got the Mordians, like you say. Those definitely have some acceptable kind of crossovers. The Vestroyans, you could probably build in around that also as well to an extent, although they're a much more kind of Soviet-looking
Yeah,
faction.
they're pretty unique in terms of their look. I mean, some of them are just like completely unique, whereas a lot of them do have a lot of visual crossovers. And obviously, it'd be great to see a bit more of like a female mix into the Guards regiments, even if that is just like different heads, not necessarily like different torsos and stuff.
Well, like the Genestealer Cult range of, because that was one of the weird things, wasn't it, in Genestealer Cults, that they had the female torsos and heads that were actually different proportions, which I think confused a lot of people when they first got those kits. It was like, hang on, this doesn't look right.
Yeah, because they're not as compatible as you would think, because obviously the heads you think you could just swap over with the bodies, but you can't, because there are specific male and female torsos and arms, and the female arms are a lot skinnier than the male arms, so that it makes your kits less interchangeable with each other, because that one arm can't now be swapped with every torso. It can only be swapped in amongst, for example, the female torsos, and the male torsos can only be swapped with like the male arms and stuff like that. So in a way, it reduces the compatibility of your range, but it gives you much more of a interesting mix of models that you can build. So I think that is a positive thing.
No, I totally agree. I think, again, though, I mean, the Guard is a range that I believe does need some attention and some extra kind of elements put into it. I mean, obviously, it was great when they introduced the plastic Cadians years and years and years and years and years ago, and sort of standardized the range back then around those, and gave people the option to kind of upgrade stuff and do their own sort of variants and all the rest of it. But again, that was a very different game system and a very different time for collecting. I mean, again, you know, I remember when I first got into 40k, there were lots of people who would have a squad of Mordian Iron Guards alongside a squad of Katachan alongside a squad of whatever. It was like, you know,
that was the same. Like, I literally had, like you said, one of every squad, because back in those days, that was sort of how you collected Imperial Guard, because every unit was different, and unless you wanted to collect the same Imperial Guard squad 10 times over, like, so that is why I literally had one of all of them. And yeah, it feels like you wouldn't get that as much anymore, even though Frontline Gaming does keep saying that's the competitive way of running Imperial Guard. I genuinely don't think most Imperial Guard players want to have one of every regiment.
No,
like, they want to collect a particular regiment that they're most drawn to.
It doesn't really work for Guard, I think, to have that mixed approach. I think back in the day of, you know, the mid-90s and the sort of second, third edition era, more specifically the second edition era, it didn't necessarily matter so much. But, I mean, and again, a lot of people did kind of collect as much as they could. I think Katachan in second edition was the most prolific of the regiments, and that was the one that seemed to have the most commanders and the most kind of assorted things that you could kind of collect for it, which was great. And it was interesting when they sort of tried early doors to do the plastic Katachans, and you know, those are models that really haven't aged well, except for obviously the command squad, which looks quite nice, but the actual standard Katachan squad with their kind of weird balloon muscles is quite a thing to behold. But nonetheless, I think, I mean, I'd be really interested to see how they kind of do that, and then also how they incorporate that into the broader range of, you know, the Genestealer Cult, and then maybe even the Necromunda scale of miniatures, and how all those things start to come together, because all of a sudden you end up with some really interesting opportunities with Guard if it works seamlessly with the Necromunda range, and it works with the Genestealer Cult range, and works with the AdMech range to create all these really interesting crossovers. And I know to an extent it does that now, but obviously the problem is with the basic Guardsman profile is they're a little bit smaller than that Necromunda scale, so to see newer models that can fit into that might be very helpful.
I think, well, what interestingly say, for example, the Traitor Guardsmen in the Blackstone Fortress definitely feel like they're a little bit bigger in scale. I don't know how they compare against the Necromunda, and I think Necromunda is just a bigger scale all around, so it might be compatible to an extent, but I don't think it will be as seamless as, say, swapping out sort of some AdMech parts. I think the AdMech line, and the rest of the 40k line is going to be much more comparable for Imperial Guard. But yeah, there are some Necromunda models which I think lots of people will convert up.
Well, you've already started seeing it, right? With certainly with like was it House Cawdor? I think it was not Cawdor.
Was the first one I think that people wanted to convert up.
Yeah, that was and that's the thing. You can start to see some really interesting opportunities coming out of that, and I think it's interesting to see. I mean, if it was that you had to, if it was in the modern era of 40k that you had to pick one of the regiments to kind of relaunch Guard with, who would you go for?
What, me personally?
You personally, Phil?
Do you know what? I always quite like the Praetorians, even though I imagine they wouldn't go with them now, just because they're sort of slightly old English colonialism. I always had because obviously they're all based on Zulu, so I think I had a bit of a soft spot for them. I remember collecting those models back in the day, because obviously I collected all the Guard back in those days. I think Katachan would be the one they'd most likely go for. They're probably the more popular regiments. They're pretty competitive. They've always got that kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger vibe to them that is very unique to them. Like, no other regiment looks like Katachan's. So I think, and they've already got, like I said, some existing models, even though they're not necessarily the best. So I think if they were to go for a new range, they'd probably go for that one. But it's completely different from everything else. I'd almost personally like to see something like Praetorian, which again is like the Iron Guard and all the others, or Mordian. Is like you just do some different heads for that kit, and then it gives you a good 4 or 5 different regiment types that you could create based on the same bodies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Joe, what would you like to see on that side of things for the old Astra Militarum if you had the choice?
I've always liked Talon. They were really cool. Because I like that whole guerrilla tactics idea of how the Guard worked. Because I was always an infantry commander over a tank commander. Or Mordians. I used to have a Mordian army a very long time ago. And that's back in the day when they had close order drill, which meant they fought at initiative 4 if all their bases were touching.
Oh yeah.
So you had I had loads of movement trays, so my army looked more like a Napoleonic marching gun line.
Brilliant.
So you could almost push them around with sticks.
Did you wear a monocle while you commanded that army?
Oh God, no! I wish I did though.
You needed a pipe and a monocle, my friend, and a bizarre flying cap, maybe. I don't know why a flying cap is essential, but maybe a scarf of some sort. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's something they definitely need to evaluate and look at anyway, because I think having more... It's fair to say that the scale of 40k has increased now, and the Guardsman, though it is kind of appropriate next to Primaris, it's not appropriate against other human-sized miniatures. Obviously, we've seen it with the new female Commissar model. She is of a much greater scale than previously released Astra Militarum models, much more in line with the scale of the Necromunda range. So I think, again, Games Workshop has obviously scaled up its range, or is starting to. So I think now that there's a wealth of conversion possibilities within that Necromunda range and other places, that's what I'd like to kind of see as a range of models that then kind of bridge the gap between the Genestealer cult, between the Necromunda range, and actually gives you a lot of opportunities to create whatever you want to do within Astra Militarum, which would be super lovely.
So you've got to think also, at the moment, they've got 6 regiments, and you can only realistically buy 1.
2.
The thing is, though, the Katachans live in this perpetual state of currently not available or stock. So if the only way you can make an army of them is literally by buying 30 heavy weapon teams and 30 command boxes.
I'll have you know, Joe, the Catachan Jungle Fighters are available right now on Games Workshop.
Oh, all right then. But
£18. I mean, when you look at the models, I mean, not to be unfair about them, but I love the fact that very front and centre of the picture of the Catachan Jungle Fighters is their sergeant with just the most horribly painted eyes. I mean, like, the paint job on this guy is just hilarious. So he's a fabulous fellow. I also like that he's got the mould line from where they've not obviously like green stuffed up or kind of patched up his arm muscles, so it looks like he's got some sort of weird prosthetic arm that he's kind of covering up or whatever. It's a fantastic look. It's a good look.
Yeah. There's the only way nowadays, if you want to run a guard army that's not Cadians, is you've got to have very deep pockets, and a very busy eBay account.
Well, potentially.
Well, it's that or Krieg or what used to be Elysians, but even it'd be an even more expensive now to try and get Elysians off of eBay, for example. So yeah, having both Krieg or Elysians come back, either to get rules or for Elysians to come back in a plastic form, that'd be really cool. I really doubt it though, but they again have a really unique look to them that's all very much more modern in comparison to the other Imperial Guard regiments. So they'd be cool to see.
Also, Joe, you can buy the Catachan Defence Force on Games Workshop's site now. £100 will get you a pretty good solid Catachan foundation. You get 3 heavy weapon teams, 2 squads, command squad, Lehman Russ, Chimera. It's all going on, mate.
When was the last time you saw a Chimera on the table?
When Phil uses them to show off that he's made those really cool looking track guards.
Yeah.
Which I understand you could make too if you follow his easy to follow guide on Beyond the Tabletop, right, Phil?
Well, indeed. It is. Although some I did just use the regular track guards, but then I've cut bits out of them and done some stuff to them. So it's not like I've made the track guards brand new.
Made the track guards brand new. What a hero, eh? Hobby hero, old Phil. But yeah, no, fair enough. I have to try, Phil. You know, I mean, that's my $10 patron going to good work there. I'm trying to up that. There you go. He's on Patreon as well, everybody. Beyond the Tabletop. Go and give them money. He needs it.
Cheers for the plug.
I know, you see. Well, there you go. I'm trying. I want more people to give you money so I can stop doing it. so I can remove myself from the process. What was I going to say? So, yeah, I mean, on my side of things, I'm going to go with something near and dear to my heart in terms of things I'd like to see. I think it would be awesome to see a return of the Elder Corsairs. I think, obviously, Corsairs have been taken off the Forge World site, or elements of them. So I think either the Corsairs or the Exodites, something new for the Elder would be super cool. I think at the end of the day, giving us a Harlequin Codex towards the end of 7th was absolutely awesome, and definitely added a nice third flavour to the overall kind of Eldari range. But I think, again, given the overarching popularity and possibilities available to us within the kind of range of options for the Eldari, I think seeing more of the Exodites would be something, or to that end, the Corsairs would be something really amazing to expand into and offer out, especially now that, you know, we're in this really mad time in the Warhammer 40,000 universe where the whole universe has been split in half, and you know, there's all sorts of mad nonsense going on all over the place, and the Imperium is going on all these crazy crusades and trying to control all these different worlds. It seems more likely now than ever that the Imperium would get in or Chaos, or whoever would end up in a bit of a conflict with the Exodites, who up to this point have managed to kind of exist on kind of outskirt worlds that haven't necessarily mattered that much to the Imperium. But I think now, in this time of dwindling resources and even more kind of issues, they might just be like, you know what, let's go over there and duff up some Exodites and take what they've got, because you know, we want some of that stuff. So yeah, something like that'd be cool, because who doesn't want us have a really, really cool elder character riding on top of a dinosaur? I mean, that's going to be absolutely awesome. So yeah, that's my 10 cents. What do you think about the idea of Exodites, Joe? Would you be excited, being now that you have joined me in the wondrous world of an Eldari collector?
Do you think they'd let them keep the dinosaurs? Or is that just a marvellous pipe dream?
What, do you think Games Workshop won't give them dinosaurs?
Yeah, I don't think they will give them dinosaurs.
Do you think they'd reimagine them to be something else? So, not exactly dinosaurs, but some kind of new lizard creatures of
Not
some
like
kind?
lizard, but there'll be more their
IP
technology.
specific.
Yeah, their technology will be more based about maneuvering by like attachments. So like scourges with their like bioengineered wings kind of thing. So like an art, kind of like maybe Daughters of Cain-esque. So their transports will have like naturistic kind of vibes, but not being naturists, obviously.
I mean, again, I think this is the thing, though, right, within the 40k universe, and why I like the idea of the Exodites, because it's a different flavour of 40k, because Orcs are one of the few factions that used to have a kind of contingency of exotic cavalry and boar boys and stuff that was obviously taken from the old fantasy range and imported into 40k. And when 3rd edition rolled around and they redesigned the Orcs and they made them more about driving in their trucks because of Gorka Morka and all the rest of it, they got rid of some of that flavour. And cavalry is something that we're seeing less and less in the game because there are fewer and fewer things that qualify to be that. I mean, obviously there's the Rough Riders for the Astra Militarum, the Death Riders for the Krieg. There is technically there are some Kroot that ride around on the back of like a bigger Kroot, and then obviously you've got the Thunderwolf Cavalry. And then you've got the Demon Cavalry, which is obviously again a little bit of a sort of side effect from Age of Sigmar / Warhammer Fantasy, but we haven't really ever seen an army that's entire makeup in 40k, with the exception probably of demons, which again it's all entities of the warp, so it's a totally different thing. We haven't seen something that is purely kind of organic or purely other than Tyranids again, obviously as well. Tyranids are an example of an organic alien race, but something that's a little bit more feral almost, or something a little bit more kind of nature and of the environment. I think that's something that could be really interesting to kind of showcase a real kind of juxtaposition within the 40k universe, a faction that, yes, okay, it's still got access to some archaic elder technologies, it's still got projectile weapons, it's still got access to the webway and certain other bits and pieces, and there's technology mixed in with that, but they're not riding around and wave serpents and jet bikes, but travelling into battle on the back of these sleek, really cool dinosaur creatures would be amazing. And again, it would change the look and feel of 40k, I think, because again it would create some really amazing kind of potential scenes where you see those new kind of more high sci-fi Primaris Marines coming up against this kind of crazy version of Elder. And again, I just think it unlocks a really interesting flavour, not just to the Eldari but to the game. I think as well, like the idea of having units that, again, like the Beastmasters from Drakari, where you've got dominion over certain types of creature and all those different things. Again, it's another opportunity to explore and broaden the kind of the wildlife of the 40k universe, and actually give you more visuals and more things that could open all sorts of possibilities. So yeah, I don't know. Exodites just seem really cool to me. I loved Dino Riders when I was a kid, so the idea of collecting an army of Dino Riders has always really appealed to me, which is why I've always sort of toyed around with the idea of doing the old Lizard Men every now and again, but never quite did it. But I think this would do the job, I would say.
It's definitely an idea, and I think thing that always ruined Exodites for me was that you always saw really terrible conversions using Eldar and Lizardmen models.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's just stupid. But I imagine if there was a properly designed, properly molded model, it might change my mind. But
I mean, again, for the game, it would be good to see an army that builds itself more around cavalry, and again, it could have a whole different design to it. Like, you could actually have its troop units being these cavalry guys that are, relatively numerous, but ultimately very fragile, but very fast, and you could have these larger kind of creatures that could definitely be interesting and have some interesting additions to it. And then obviously some smaller swarms and some other bits and pieces, and then foot slogging characters, as along with just the idea of a bunch of like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild type squad that's of Eldari that are going into battle on gliders or something crazy like that would be pretty cool. Like, I don't know, something like the Ewoks within Star Wars, right? Like,
well for me, isn't that more like Kroot, and what, if they did a dedicated Kroot codex, they could fill out a lot of those niche sort of tribal close combat cavalry, like I said, Ewoks in space. And also it'd be good for Tau to have a sort of dedicated ally.
I totally agree
like
with you.
A sub-faction, which would be a bit more interesting than yet another Elder army.
I totally agree.
It's a very unique Elder army, so I mean that is good in itself.
Yeah, look, I think if it was that you could take those ideas and apply them to the Kroot, I'd be totally in favour of that as well. I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing. Either do it as a Kroot or do it as Exodites. Exodites, I guess, is a bit of an long-standing fanboyism for me, but yeah, God, if you could do it as Kroot, I'd be totally happy with that. I think I'd be really into that, like the idea of doing an army that was a little bit more, like you say, tribalistic, feral, blah blah blah, all these sort of, this crazy kind of. Like the savage orcs from Age of Sigmar type army would be amazing. And again, what an incredible juxtaposition to add to your Tau army potentially, right? Like the idea of having the super highly technological Tau offset by the insane kind of rudimentary technology of Kroot, which is then mixed in with Tau technology that's been gifted to them. I think the problem it depends, because I think that's the other thing, isn't it? Because Kroot now have become so kind of integrated into the Tau Empire. It's almost like as their stories evolved, they've become more, not technologically advanced, but they've been gifted more kind of technology, to the point that some of those older kind of ideas of Kroot hounds and all that stuff has kind of not gone away, but it's been sort of pushed out into the periphery. Whereas it actually would be quite nice to actually have a more traditional Kroot army that actually was, more in line with what they were before the Tau came along. So, that would be cool.
It sort of shows, but it feels like the original idea of Tau was that you had a small amount of very highly advanced units, and they were mostly supplemented by other races that filled different niches in their army. So you had the Kroot, and then you had was it the Vespids? And then was there a couple of other units that they had as well? Was it just those two? They do mention the is it Duardin, the sort of
the squats.
Apparently the squats, yeah, but they never got models, but they appeared in Battlefleet Gothic. Can't quite remember what their name was though.
Demiurge, or whatever it's called.
Demiurge, yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
and it felt like Tau was meant to be more developing those other sort of sub races, and then in the end it just ends up being giant robots.
Well, I think the thing is, again, interestingly, I had a really great chat with one of the kind of lead designer guys at WarhammerFest, and he's been instrumental in, advancing the Tau range. And I think the fact of the matter is that when you give a bunch of designers an incredible opportunity to create these amazing kind of mech suits and robots, that they're obviously going to prioritize that. And I think it's only natural that Tau came out of the Tau Empire being the predominant force of the Tau Empire, and that they expanded that range and explored that range further to the expense of the older established kind of alien entities within it, and I think that would be a good kind of adjustment of the situation to revisit those and put more of those races back in. The only thing is like, would you want to see a Vespid Codex? I don't know, is there enough within the Vespid range that it could be expanded into something like that? I don't know, but then, you know, I think maybe the Vespids have got more opportunities than my limited perception of them is maybe giving them, but
it's like even the Dark Elder have those, I can't remember what they're called, but the sort of weird lizard snake. Yeah, so there are lots of like creatures and alien races that are interspersed within the 40k range that only have a couple of models here and there that could be expanded. It's like you look at the Nighthaunt range, that was literally based on one pre-existing model, and they've just gone, what happens if there was an army of this? And there's plenty of models within 40k where they could also do that. Likewise, like even the Rogue Trader models, and it's like there's now there's two Rogue Traders out, and there's one coming down the line, or sort of piratey one with peg leg, and it's like it feels like Rogue Traders could be a codex in its own right, where they've got a very sort of elite Imperial Guard vibe to them, but also with a bit more sort of flair and style and a more exotic range of units and weaponry. That could one day be a thing if they release more models.
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, that's the thing. There's so much depth to the 40k universe across all the different things. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if they brought back the lair somehow or something along those lines? Like, oh, Fulgrim killed all the lair. No, he didn't. There was a bunch of lair somewhere, and here they are. So, like, you know, having all the kind of army of, you know, again, I suppose sort of Daughters of Cain style thing, where it's all sort of snake people with multiple arms and crazy nonsense. But like, or the any of the other alien races that come to mind, Joe? I suppose there was the arachnids from Murder or whatever it was called.
The mega arachnids they were called, weren't they?
Yeah.
On Murder, but that was like the last of that race that was being kept on like a zoo, wasn't it?
But was it, Joe?
Well, who was the race that was holding them?
Oh Lord, was it the Diasporex or something? No.
They were a very Eldar-esque race themselves, anyway.
Was it the Diasporex? No. Oh, what were they called? That was where they got the living sword that they used for things and spoilers. What were they called? Oh, I can't remember now, mate. We'll have to look that up at some point. But yeah, no. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, something within the history of 30k or something of that nature could be quite interesting. Definitely to sort of expand it a bit again would be great.
Beastmen would be a cool one, because there's a lot of talk about Beastmen in the Chaos line, in the Chaos books as well, like manning the ships and stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe having those pop up would be quite cool.
See, that's the thing though, like Beastmen to me doesn't strike me as needing to be its entire own range. I mean, Beastmen feel like what they are, which is a few kind of complementary units. So having a unit of Beastmen with certain abilities makes sense, but not having a whole army of them. Because again, you could technically have... Because weren't Beastmen also part of the Loyalist Astra Militarum for a while?
Yeah, they were back in like Rogue Trader. You could have them. I presume now though they would be purely for a rogue, like Renegade Guard Codex to go, and that's clearly going to be a thing because they've got a very large model range now based on all the Blackstone Fortress releases.
I think, look, the long story short is it's going to be a really exciting prospect and potential kind of opportunity for all sorts of things to happen, which is just great for the hobby. I really can't wait to see what they come up with, and I think, you know, ultimately, who knows where they'll take it or what history they'll draw upon, or, again, because this is the thing, since the Great Rift has kind of torn the universe in two, there's so much more potential to explore, so many potential things. I mean, even if that's, you know, new races being drawn to this part of the galaxy because, or the universe rather, or whatever it is, because ultimately they've seen just the horrific things that are going on there, and now within a kind of sub-universe, it looks like they've created something. Before it was a little eye of terror that threatened the immediate universe of the 40k universe, or the 40k world, and now it's kind of turned into a massive thing that actually now looks like an eye of terror to the rest of the galaxy, the neighbouring worlds that have never been explored yet, and what lies beyond. And maybe they're going, well, let's start introducing these guys in and bringing this stuff in and having this stuff, or even God was having something really crazy like a hybrid race of humans and aliens that kind of again long escaped from terror and is coming back to do their own crusade. Imagine that, a new empire that's forged a new world and come back into 40k. Wouldn't that be mad? They're never going to do it because that's just going to get into way too much madness. But you know what I mean? Like, it would be. There's so much opportunity now with what they've created and what they've done to do anything, which is super exciting. Because I mean, it definitely is the most exciting time to be invested in this hobby, because all that kind of stagnant nature of where it was and where it needed to remain has kind of gone away. So. Yeah, I'm super excited to see what they come up with, whatever it may be. But let's hope it's Kroot or Exodites, eh? Yeah.
Yay.
So with that said, I don't know, does anyone have any closing points or thoughts or feelings on all of that stuff?
I'm all good. I think we've covered the basic wish listing list.
What about squats? Do you think there be a thing?
God, no.
Nah, never, mate. They're never doing squats again.
Do you know what? I don't think they will. Obviously, they're slowly introducing them sort of back into Necromunda, but I think they're just doing that as the odd niche model.
Well, Necromunda's kind of like a world within itself, right? It's not really of the... Well, it is of the 40k universe, but it isn't 40k, is it? It's like how Blood Bowl is of the old world, but it's not the real old world. It's the one where they gave up fighting each other just to play Blood Bowl all the time.
Well, no, do you know what? I think they are very much... It is within 40k, because I was asking the guy about what the time period was, and he didn't quite know, because I think some of the characters were sort of set sort of hundreds of years ago. So I don't know if it's... I think it is meant to be within 40k. It's not like a separate universe or multiverse type situation, which Blood Bowl definitely is. So it is interesting that they've got those odd squat characters, because that sort of does make them canon again.
No, I totally agree. So yeah, with that all said, I guess there's nothing else to do but move on to the bit where we say goodbye for another episode of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast. Transitional noise. Woo! So that concludes episode 21 of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast. Not content with 20, we carried on to 21. Aren't we clever boys? Yes, of course we are. I would have probably said that at the start as well, but I'm saying it again just because, I need to reiterate how clever we are on a consistent basis. Otherwise they feel inferior. And on the topic of feeling inferior, why not talk to Joe for a moment? How you doing, buddy?
I'm alright.
He's alright. Well, did you think that was a fine episode?
It was pretty good. I wasn't here for most of it, but...
Do you think that enhances the overall performance of an episode or decreases
the
value?
You've got to learn to miss someone. I think that's... If you have them all the time, then you get complacent.
I mean, on the topic of missing people as well, obviously we didn't do a end of the show quiz this time around, because when we came to record on Wednesday the 22nd, Richie, at the very last minute, turned around to us and said, no, I'm out tonight. So, he let us down. We're not blaming him, ultimately, he's entitled to have a life outside of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, but we are judging him silently and correctly, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, Phil's still here as well, aren't you, Phil?
Just about, yeah.
Managed to keep yourself awake, keeping the energy levels high.
Of course.
There you go. But yeah, that was episode 21 of the Lookout Surf 40k podcast. It was really great to talk about our experiences at WarhammerFest. Joe, you weren't at WarhammerFest or even talking in the WarhammerFest segment, so it's only tradition that I ask you to come up with on the spot something that you liked from WarhammerFest based on a third-party perspective. Or third-person perspective, not third-party perspective.
I'm really excited for the new Horus Heresy stuff, where they're going to take that. So I really like all the White Scar stuff that's come out.
That does look good.
It's really good modelling prospects for doing a 40k White Scars army, which no one would do anyway because their chapter tactics are terrible.
That is true.
As a side note, isn't it funny how White Scars were literally the best Space Marine chapter you could run throughout 7th? And then Games Workshop murdered them dead.
I'm not surprised. I mean, you can still... Can you? There's no real... I don't know, it's difficult. It's very difficult to make anything... Because the thing is, I suppose, with Space Marines, is the stuff that makes Space Marines good now is more the Primaris range than necessarily the traditional range of Space Marines, and the Primaris range of Space Marines getting little to no benefit from the chapter tactics of the White Scars, so it's one of those, isn't it? It's difficult, but maybe they'll correct it in the future, come up with their own codex, perhaps. Who can say?
That would be quite nice, because I think a lot of White Scars people are left just running them as Raven Wing.
Yeah, although isn't that funny, isn't it, as well? Because a lot of people who were running Ravenwing before were running them as White Scars in previous editions. It's strange how the wheel turns when it comes to collecting Marines on bikes. I mean, again, there's an army that you don't really see very much anymore, period, though, isn't it? It's like bike-based armies like the White Scars or Marines on bikes. There was something quite lovely about those armies back in the day that, again, it's rare that I ever see them now. It's a shame, but there you go. But no, the White Scars look really good though, man. I really like the look of the Dark Angel stuff as well from that release. That Terminator Captain, or whatever he's supposed to be called, Praetor, is well lovely.
It's stunning, and their Leviathan Dreadnought is rather lovely as well. I do like that they're doing specialised Leviathan Dreadnoughts for each army now, which is pretty awesome.
Phil, did you notice that the Dreadnought, or were you just about to say that, Joe, that it's covered in candles?
The Dark Angels one?
Well, he's got a couple candles on him. Every time I see a candle, I think of Phil.
But how do they stay lit?
They live their life.
Well, there's a
like
little
a
servo
candle in the
skull
wind.
flying around, lighting them up, obviously.
Well, what if he's like in the middle of like a fight? And he's literally surrounded by 100 orcs.
All with hose pipes.
Yeah. Or he just runs at the burner boys at the hope that they'll keep him going.
Maybe it was. Maybe it's like the Olympic flame. Maybe that's what it was. They never go out because of clever, advanced candle technology that keeps them illuminated in all situations.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like the sort of thing the Emperor would prioritise in his later years. Before, obviously, the troubling times of him, he definitely would have spent a lot of time perfecting the everlasting candle, right?
Yeah. Or fixing disease or famine candles.
No, absolutely. Well, I think everyone would agree they had the right idea because, nothing quite accentuates a model like a candle.
That's true. Although they could have a little servo skull, like Phil said, because that new Rogue Trader model, which is rather lovely, has got a revolver which is being reloaded by a little servo skull.
Yeah, no, it's always nice when you see little servo skulls with very, very rubbish jobs. It's always a great thing to imagine in that regard. Although it wouldn't be a very nice fate for anyone, I suppose, to end up as that particular servo skull. But I guess at that point you're pretty much dead. Although, do you still have to not have some organic material in that whole situation because of the whole we don't like robots and so on and so forth? So that's like someone's severed head, right?
Yeah, pretty much. They have like all their internal organs, like the useful ones, just pushed up inside the blobby body skull bit.
Is that what they do? They just try and get your lungs into your lower jaw. I mean, to be fair, you probably need a lot less oxygen in your body when you're just a head.
Yeah.
You know, I imagine if you were just a floating head, you could survive on one lung.
Easily.
What do you reckon, Phil? You're an expert on these sorts of things.
Yeah, I think it would be easy.
Yeah.
Fine.
There you go. Good. Well, I'm glad we covered off that important point. So there you go. Well, thank you, Joe, for contributing that. And thank you, everyone else, for listening to episode 21 of the Lookout Surf 40k podcast. As always, we encourage those of you who would like to reach out to us and tell us how wonderful you think we are at doing all this nonsense to do so, because, you know, it's getting harder and harder to find the will to carry on, I find, you know, and I need some kind of, you know, positivity and love in my existence. Otherwise, it's, I don't know if I'll you know, ever manage to keep on going. But, you know, I mean, with that said, if you want to reach out and say nice things about us or bad things about us, I mean, to be fair, that might also give me a distraction that I can get all kind of invested in. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/lookout sir. Yes, lookout sir. And there you'll find us, and you can message us and, you know, tell us what you think about what we're doing. We also have Instagram, don't we, Joe?
We do. It's not hugely active at the moment, but
No.
it will pick up.
Will it? Will it really, Joe?
I think you keep saying this every episode.
Only the future will tell.
I've seen, you know, newer podcasts come into existence, Joe, and because they have more comprehensive and, you know, well-oiled social media enterprises, they're already eclipsing us. How has this happened? I mean, admittedly, we might just be really that bad, but at the same time, I think it's entirely your fault for doing a terrible job on social media.
It could be likely that is a thing.
That's it.
But, you know, I've gone out into the world, and I've sold myself to other YouTube channels, which is actually a reminder. I went on to Winters SEO channel and did a battle.
Do you know when that's going out into the world?
I actually think it's coming out next week.
Will it be freely available, or do those that want to watch you perform at 40k need to pay?
It goes on to the free tubes.
Ooh, the free tubes.
I will contact Winters and find out when that is going live. We'll make that known. I'll put some photos up from when I was there.
Would you say being on the free version of YouTube is a positive thing or a negative thing? Is it positive in the sense that you're such an attraction and such a fabulous individual that he's using you as bait to lure in potential paying customers, or is it that you're that cheap and rubbish that you're the sort of person that he doesn't mind giving away for free?
I'd like to think it was the first one, but most likely it's the second one.
Well, I suppose we'll find out when Phil goes on there later in the year, right? Then we can have a point of comparison.
Oh,
Yeah,
we'll
we'll
see.
see.
Yeah.
Aren't you, Phil?
Oh, I am. Yeah. I think it's September sometime.
Yeah. I'm not at any point going on there because he doesn't like to play against cheaty tournament filth, and I don't have anything else at the moment that's painted. So yeah, I haven't reached out and tried to get myself on
You've
there.
got a Blood Angels army.
I do have a lovely Blood Angels army painted by you, which is obviously awesome. So
And
Yeah,
yeah,
lovely knights as well.
army. The Knights of Mechanicum.
Yeah, another lovely Knights of Mechanicum army painted by you, which I do have. Yeah, so you are right. I do have options, I suppose, in that regard. I'm looking forward to it because obviously me and Phil are doubling up at Warhammer World at the 40k doubles in a few weeks. I'm really hopeful that I win Best Painted with your painted army. It's going to be great.
I hope that I want you to. But then it will also be sad that I haven't won it with an army that I've painted whilst I've been there.
Yeah. Could you imagine how absolutely livid you'll be when it's me and Phil lifting Best Painted trophies and I refuse to give them to you because I'm like, no, this is mine now. Mine.
I will live on as like a silent victor. You know?
Well, I was trying to work out what the etiquette is for that, right? Because obviously when they come around, they'll be like, did you paint your army? I kind of am tempted, and again, I'm going to say this for public record, I'm tempted just to go, yes, and then when it happens, be like, I didn't paint it, but one of my very, very good friends did, and I didn't want for him to miss out on this opportunity to win this award, even though he's not here to earn it, and I will give you the prize, Joe, if it is that it is won by something that you painted.
Oh, that's all right then.
Exactly.
I can live with that.
I think that's fair enough. I think I can have that moment of glory of my photo in a thing, where as long as I'm clear the whole way through that it's I don't know, because would they award it because they would come over and go, did you paint this? And if I said no, they'd just be like, okay, well, you can't be considered, wouldn't they? That's how that goes.
Yeah.
They'd just move on.
Yeah, I don't know. What's a little lie between me and the Warhammer World events team? I mean, at the end of the day, so many other people have lied to achieve so much more in that environment, so, it's all good. Anyway, we digress massively, but so that was episode 21. Please check us out on Facebook and Instagram if you like infrequent, terrible updates. Ours is the Instagram for you. Alternatively, you can check us out on our own Instagrams. You've got Phil at Beyond the Tabletop. That's right, isn't it, Phil?
It is indeed.
And then you got Joe at Subtle Painting.
Subtle.
And then you've got myself, IR Invested in the Unexpected. So please come and check us out on the old Instagrams, because again, we need the social outreach and the numbers to fulfill the voids in our hearts. So that said, that was episode 21 of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast. I have been Dan, Phil has been Phil, Joe has been here, and obviously special thanks to Tim for also contributing. Final thoughts, Joe?
It's been a lovely time, and we will see you again soon.
That we will. And for you, Phil? Amazing. Bye, everyone.
I don't have anything.
Bye, everyone. Bye. 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 Bye.